Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This is S4A Livestream number 80, being recorded on January 28, 2023. So, you may notice, if you follow these things closely, that Livestream number 79, which was conducted on Wednesday, just a few days ago, is not on the channel. That's because we had a technical error that I've never had before. I really don't know what happened. Where only about 2 minutes and 15 seconds of the roughly 3 hour stream was recorded. So I normally don't stream on Saturdays, but I kind of wanted to get some stuff out that we were talking about in that stream. So this is going to be a partial redo of what we did in stream 79, and it's going to be partly new stuff. And we'll just do the best that we can because that's what we can do. So, by definition. We have about 30 people in the chat right now, which is great because sometimes the Saturday streams are kind of crazy. I like it when the chat is on the smaller side, a few dozen people. So, we got 35. That's a good number. And then we can have an actual conversation rather than, just comments flying up and people trolling and spamming and all kinds of shit like that. I like it to be more like a classroom or discussion circle or, something, not that we can't have fun, but that's a bit more serious as far as the content goes, and it's not just fucking, bullshit. So anyway, sometimes the Saturday streams get really, really voluminous as far as the viewership, and so far that's not the case. That's also why I have raids turned off on the channel. Raids are where other channels can dump their chat into yours. We tried that once, and it was just a complete shit show. We had like 120 people in the chat. At that point, conversation is not really possible. And there are, a lot of people who show up to the Twitch chats regularly who honestly deserve more recognition. Some of them are patrons, some are not. But they show up and it's their comments that you hear me reading week after week. There's definitely a good 24 people I see in here on a really regular basis. Appreciate them a lot. And I was just telling them offline that we are going to be... So we did 75, 76 streams last year in 2022. That was the first time that we did live streaming, actually. We started on the second anniversary of the channel, which was February 2022, almost a full year ago. And I hadn't live streamed before that, but I felt it was time to attempt it, and we certainly demonstrated that live streams are a thing that we can do. While I am in the habit of timestamping the videos, which I post in one piece, I'm also going to start clipping them because, I know that there's a lot of people who listen in their car or at work, and they're looking for hours and hours of content. They want to listen to a 2.5 hour block of something, and those, full piece live streams work well for them. Other people, not so much, and honestly, the timestamps should be a help for you there, but I know that clipping stuff, it just kind of gets more views and things, and I haven't had time for it. I think that I can make time for that this year, so expect clips out of the live streams, and so anyway, that's kind of a new innovation that you'll be seeing on the channel as we enter year number 4 in just a few weeks, actually. So I'll probably start by clipping shows 78 and 79, which were from earlier in the month, and that's about it. Also, some of you may know I appeared on the Thin Blue Lies podcast with Sal from the Red Army. That may be more of a monthly thing if that keeps up. So there, and I'm thinking that this year I might be branching out a little bit more. I've had offers from people to appear on their channel, for sort of a collaboration thing, and that's not... Well, it hasn't always been appealing to me for a variety of reasons. Sometimes when I don't know the person inviting me, I had some appearances in 2022 or in 2020 that, let's just say I learned to be more careful after that. And So I'm kind of trying to be selective and work with people who actually know their work and things like that. But yeah, I also think that the channel is at a point now where this really is a collaborative effort, and it's also too much for just one individual, me, to keep going at this level. So, I mean, already in 2022, we have all the contributions from the people who regularly show up in the live streams and ask questions and submit articles and this and that. There's been the patrons for some time now, etc. I think S4A needs to keep growing and branching out. So we'll be doing a bit more of that in the coming year too. Yeah, it's good. We're coming up on the 3-year anniversary of starting this YouTube channel in just about a week. So I've been thinking a lot about stuff like that. And so on. Just how do we keep things moving, onwards and upwards. And yeah. So anyway, getting into the chat before we get into any of the articles for today, I do have quite a lot of stuff pulled, some odds and ends. Everything from the Trader Joe's union to mass strikes in France to things going on in Florida as far as the AP African American Studies course, some COVID things, and then some things on the sort of pro-Russian opportunism that we're seeing, the sort of BRICS and multipolarity hysteria, and kind of the crown jewel in that, a piece about who is behind decommunization or desovietization in Russia. We've heard some things about decommunization in Ukraine. The same thing is going on in Russia, and it's the same kind of far-right interests that are pushing that. So there's a great anti-fascist article written originally in Russian, found by Comrade Shpakova, and sent over. Actually, I forgot to mention when we were talking about the patrons and the people who show up as Twitch regulars and everything, there's also people who regularly send stuff through Twitter or through Reddit. And anyway, it's really made this channel, I've learned a lot from it and hope to keep learning. But anyway, yeah, thanks to Comrade Shpakova, who's been studying the decommunization process throughout the former USSR countries and China, doing that for about 10 years. And so we'll be looking at that. It was a very good find, actually. All right. So, getting into the chat, that's some idea of what's coming up in the show today. Yeah, and if I don't see your, or if I haven't responded to the question, which you just posted, Tenampu, about 2 seconds ago, you don't have to keep posting it. All right. Gonna go through the chat now. In our struggle for power, we must not be stopped by any principles. We should be prepared for any tricks, illegal methods, and lies. Are you meaning that we should be prepared to be confronted by them? Okay. I see it's a Lenin quote, but I'm not able to place the context of it. If you want to get your blood up, I don't, but it happens. Think about egg prices and how they blamed bird flu. They just bumped the prices. Yeah, the whole egg shortage thing, I'm not really sure what is going on there exactly. I mean, I have seen notices of an egg shortage for some time now at the supermarkets. And I actually tried looking it up because I was like, egg shortage? What the fuck are they talking about? And yeah. Prices are going crazy. I don't even know what to say about that. It's going to be a real test, here in the U.S. of how much shit people are willing to take. We've already learned that on COVID, people are willing to do all kinds of mental gymnastics to just swallow horrific conditions. Where will it end? I really do. I wish I could tell you. I don't relate to the people just taking it in stride. I have never really been that way in my life. I don't relate to people who operate that way. It makes me sick. And I can't understand, people weathering the sort of bad conditions silently. It goes against everything in my body, so I don't get it, and it's very, very frustrating to endure that. What do you think of the left wing in the United Kingdom? I am not in the United Kingdom. I've never lived in the United Kingdom. I don't really know. My guess is it's pretty similar to the left wing in many other advanced capitalist imperialist countries, and it's, struggling. The one piece, well, actually, two pieces that I had heard recently is one of the organizations that looked pretty good in terms of the policies and the writings that they were putting out, Red Fight Back. Somebody told me that Red Fight Back a couple weeks ago was like in the process of falling apart. I haven't gotten any updates since then, so I don't know, but that's very unfortunate to hear. As far as, what little else I know, CPGB-ML and OMFUG, no, Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, with, I don't know, they're kind of in the Maupin camp. I saw that they had interviewed Caleb Maupin, brought him on the show for a while, so, that would seem to be garbage. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what can we say about the left wing in, most imperialist countries? Social chauvinist, and co-opted, opportunist, etc. Oh yeah, that's the other thing. Lots of Trotskyists in the UK, sort of like Trot Central. So this has been a thing for a while in the US, where you find communists. A lot of them are Trotskyists. Although Trotsky is split and split and split, that's kind of their thing too. So there will be many Trotskyist organizations, which can kind of make them seem somewhat more numerous than they actually are. But yeah, UK is also Trot Central. If somebody tells you that they're a Marxist in the UK, ask them if they're Trotskyist first. And yes, also a lot of anarchists. I'd say that's more the case in the US, where the left is like very heavily anarchist. As I say, one of my goals for Socialism for All is to improve the quality of particularly the US left, because that's where I am and that's what I probably know the best. And one of the things I would like to see is the US left grow out of its anarchist phase, which just is not going to really lead us too far. And I'm really hoping that more people come to that conclusion, and as quickly as possible. Otherwise, improving the US left, meaning things like becoming more effectively anti-fascist, understanding the class nature of fascism, what it is, where does it come from, it's capitalism in crisis, where you get a movement put out to basically be a decoy for disgruntled working people. It will have some radical sounding rhetoric. It will sound angry. It will sound like it wants to tear things down, etc. But its actual content is counter-revolutionary. So revolutionary appearance, aesthetics, rhetoric, counter-revolutionary content. So I think libertarianism is very much embodies that, and libertarianism is, of course, crypto-fascism. They have a lot of idealist talking points against war, against police, but then they're for completely liberalizing everything, just total insane free marketeers, privatize everything. You can't have capitalism without war and the police and all that stuff. It's in the nature of capitalism to become imperialism. It did that a long time ago, and to need to expand, so you need wars. You can't just have anti-war capitalism. That's nonsense. And who's going to enforce your private property rights but a police state? Especially the more the capital gets consolidated, the more oppressive it gets, the larger the proletariat gets, and the more that people realize this system is not in our material interests, then the police have to get, bigger and tougher and scarier and more militarized, because the capitalists are, on a shrinking island there. More and more wealth is in their name, but they are fewer in number, and the system is less and less appealing. They have less support for the system, and that's where the cops come in. So yeah, libertarians, they want to have like, complete free market, deregulated capitalism, everything privatized, no safety net, etc. And they think they could somehow, or they don't. The ones at the top understand you can't actually do that without war and a police state and all that kind of stuff. A lot of the lower level dupes have bought into this total just idealist bullshit of capitalism without war. No, materially, capitalism needs those things. It's pure idealism to think. Now, hey, if you're against war and you're against the police state, okay, we can do that, but you have to change the system. You can't. That's incompatible with capitalism. So anyway, understanding the class nature of fascism, more effectively anti-fascist left, I would like to see. Also, a less nationalist, more internationalist, less chauvinist, anti-imperialist left. I would like to see that. So, I think that we're making strides in that direction, but for decades and decades, that's kind of been the way that it is. And yeah. So anyway, let's see. Somebody else talking about the UK left. The only decent ones are the orthodox Marxists in the ICFI. Well, that would be your opinion. Orthodox Marxism seems like a contradiction in terms, unless I'm misunderstanding. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of left-com. It's anti-Leninist. There's that work, and I am still, it's the weekend, and I'm not at 100%. These streams are a bit sharper on Wednesday. There is a work, it's in the Foundations playlist from foreignlanguages.press, and its name is just escaping me. But there is like a basic work that laid out the, quote, orthodox Marxist position. Yeah. Didn't you say it was your goal to make a huge communist community by 2025 or 2030? Yeah, so yes and no. The year that I specified was 2030, and I would like to see, I think that if the far left pushes hard in the 2020s, we can have a moment by 2023 that makes sort of a mainstream splash. That was the statement. So I did a video on this a while ago around the hashtag Revolution 2030. I also use Rev 2030. And that's kind of a stock thing that I've put on basically everything in the little block of hashtags that I apply to videos. And basically where that comes from, I mean, I explained it at the time, but in the sort of 80s, 90s, 2000s, libertarians made a lot of hay out of everything and really, especially in the 2000s, had a huge online presence, early internet, and they had a big moment in 2010. Of course, they were useful to the capitalist class at that point, post-2008, to channel all of the outrage over 2008 into this happened because it's socialism, and this happened because the global economic meltdown happened because things weren't deregulated enough, and it's not right-wing enough, and so you get this faux populist, we're going to fix this, folks. I'm a banker, but I drive a pickup truck. All this just kind of totally bogus bullshit. That is libertarianism through and through. But, they went in the 2000s pretty hard on the internet, and they had kind of, became like a household thing in 2010. SOCDEMs in the 2010s pushed pretty hard, late 2000s, 2010s, things like the Young Turks and Secular Talk, again, pushed hard, cultivated a big online following. You have the Bernie Sanders moment and, AOC and all that kind of stuff. By the end of the 2010s, they have a moment. The idea of Rev 2030 is if we, Marxists, push hard in the 2020s, hopefully we can have a moment by 2030 where this movement takes some kind of better form. And obviously, we're not pawns of the ruling class like libertarians, and the SOCDEM thing So, maybe we can do this for real this time. That's what I would like to see. So I see S4A as part of a goal of doing that push. We're not the only channel in the international communist movement, obviously, but that was sort of the thought there. Yeah. So, a viewer from Greece finally found out what's wrong with people in my country while listening to the previous week's streams. We've got too many petty bourgeois guys. Maybe civil servants, many civil servants, many people owning homes and maybe just a small piece of land, an acre or two, and so many others who just don't believe things are going to get much worse. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of the U.S. as well. And then a lot of the people at the bottom think that they're going to get into that position too. So they're already preparing their consciousness, their mind is sort of already living, in suburbia, even though they may never actually be able to get there. Hell will freeze over before Trots achieves socialism. They've been going for a while, and you have to say Trotskyists started out from a pretty strong position, and it's been pretty much all downhill since the 1930s. So, yeah, I personally really want basically nothing to do with Trotskyism. And then there was a response to that other comment. Where I live, even working class people don't have class solidarity. You see many people who work in the private sector shit on people who work in the public sector because they have better benefits usually. And to a certain extent, they have a point. We have quite a lot of party-based employment, but we still have bigger fishes to catch and not working class people going against each other who are, quote, lazy and who isn't. Yeah, absolutely. People have just adopted all kinds of bourgeois ideas that completely directly work against the working class because they don't see beyond this, and they just see the system that's in front of them. And it's our job as communists to remind them that this is not the end, and just merely adapting to capitalism means you're going to, A, prolong it, and B, when capitalism ends, you're going to go down with the ship. Start preparing now for the transition, fighting for socialism. We need to revive the dreams of life beyond capitalism, because people just getting trapped in, I would rather spend my life dreaming of revolution and, agitating and educating and organizing towards that, than just giving into the system and trying to just do my best within capitalism and have it be that. I had a phase in my development before I sort of, committed to the left, where I thought, I had like a brief mini, I guess, quasi-conservative phase where, it was just sort of like, I'll look out for me and this and that. And it lasted a few years, and I was just like, this is hell. This is really stupid. And I would rather, spend my life fighting against capitalism and dreaming of a future that I don't have yet, but that which we're fighting for, than just sort of giving in and letting the system, like, rob me of my soul, basically. I personally love how you're basically robbing Jeff Bezos by gaming Twitch to make the most wholesome place for people to learn. Great to hear you're going to keep growing. That is the plan, and so far, yes, we have been growing consistently. The channel's at 12,300, and the Twitch channel is around about 1,000 right now. So yeah, that's where we're at. So yeah, and again, please don't repost comments. If I haven't read it, I maybe am just talking about something else first, or maybe I don't, want to read your comment. I'm under actually no obligation to do that. So yeah. Thank you for making audiobooks. It makes everything more accessible. Lol. Yeah, so, and I'll just say this about the audiobooks. I'm still making audiobooks. I'm in the middle of recording one right now. But, I put a shitload of stuff up on the channel as far as short, okay, maybe not a shitload, but I put about 10 pieces by Paul Lafargue up on the channel They're short. They should be easy to listen to. They have about 150 listens. It's hard for me to want to keep busting my ass. There's like 300 audiobooks on the channel. To me, I have to stop and go, this was first of all about I wanted to do more reading. Believe me, by this point, 3 years into the channel, I've done a lot of reading. I'm fairly satisfied. There's still more stuff I want to read. But as far as, I'm going, I sort of got that improved grasp of communist history and theory that I was looking for. And so it's hard for me to put that, 310th, 320th, 330th audiobook on the channel if people aren't going to make full use of what is already up there. You know what I'm saying? So, do listen to the audiobooks. Otherwise, there's less motivation for me to keep doing that. I will keep making audiobooks, for sure, and there's some major works I haven't gotten to on the channel yet. I will get to them. But it's not always top priority when I can sit there and spend 2 hours recording and editing and posting something, and then like 100 people listen to it. So, yeah. And then the other just absolutely head-spinning thing is, you post something like that. It takes, 3 hours out of your life to do that. And then literally, without even listening to the thing I posted, people are like, do this next. No. How about no? How about you fucking listen to the 300 things I already posted, for fuck's sake? Yeah, so anyway, it's like listen to the audiobooks that are there. And then, when I feel like we need more audiobooks, I'll post more audiobooks. Yugoslavia's socialism was pretty mild, and there are people who like to cry about that and try so hard to decommunize it too. Yeah, I mean, so the capitalist class wants to stamp out any trace that socialism ever existed, and where they can't completely stamp it out, they need to tarnish its memory by basically blaming it for everything bad that happened in the 20th century. So, yeah. Some people on the egg shortage have bought all the eggs from local stores and are reselling them for $2 more. And this is the kind of shit-ass country that we have in the United States. Actually, that's a good jumping off point for the Luna Oi thread. So for those who aren't familiar, Luna is another communist YouTuber who lives in Vietnam. And her partner is from the U.S. And she's been visiting the U.S. recently. Posted this thread on Twitter about basically observations from a Vietnamese communist visiting the United States. Here we go. I could relate to a lot of this. I mean, I was born in the United States, spent, most of my life here, and this stuff still gets to me. For people who have never made it out of the U.S., do try to go anywhere else for a while. Coming back to the U.S., it will definitely give you a lot of perspective. Anyway, she says, I've been in the U.S. for about 3 months. Let me tell you, it fucking sucks. To all non-USAians who are dreaming of the American dream, you better wake the fuck up and stop believing in those lies. Why the U.S. sucks? A thread. Food. A fast food meal, Waffle House, KFC, etc., is around $10 to $12 per person. If you eat in a decent restaurant, it is $15 to $25. Or more, I would add. Shocked face emoji. The only affordable restaurant I found is Taco Bell, which is about $7 per person. Fresh veggies are totally unaffordable. Fucking wild. Yeah. I mean, food. You need to eat it multiple times a day. It's important. And yeah. I mean, I learned how to cook years ago. And so I don't spend that much money on food. I use, cheap vegetarian ingredients and, appropriate amount of like spices and things to flavor. And it's a lot cheaper. You can buy things in bulk and make them yourself. But trying to buy pre-made food is so ridiculously expensive. And the point about the fresh fruits and vegetables is absolutely true. I tend to use more frozen because they keep longer and they're cheaper and stuff like that. I use fresh when I can, But yeah, it will just burn a hole in your pocket for sure. Clothes. A new hat is around $30 to $60. A new shirt is usually around $50. Now, there were people in the thread saying like, oh, you can find clothes for less than that. I mean, you go to the mall, yeah, you can find stuff on sale, but the stuff you want might not be on sale. And this is true. You know, your average sort of pair of jeans, if they're not on sale, definitely going to be in that range. And yeah, I mean, it's crazy. You know, a while back I went during one of the like like they have those like fall back to school sales, and I was able to get like a bunch of pairs of pants for like $30, but it was the cheap brand and they were on sale. So I mean, normally they would have been 50, 60 or more. So yeah, I mean, clothes are definitely expensive. I couldn't buy any new clothes in the US, not in 100 years. The only place that I found affordable is Goodwill or thrift stores where they sell secondhand stuff that people donated. Let me add on that note, the days of good thrift store finds are largely gone. The stuff you find in there today is like crap. Because, I mean, 20 years ago, it was the 2000s, and it was like all the just sort of like cheap, bland, nondescript, like Old Navy clothes and stuff like that. And so it's like, that's what you can find there today is like some random, like plain yellow sweatshirt with like a hole and like a ketchup stain on it for $3. I mean, it's probably better than like wearing nothing at all, but it's not exactly stylish necessarily. And gone are those days. Back in the 80s or 90s, those places were full of clothes from the 60s and 70s, and I don't know, it was just a different game entirely. But yeah, it's the clothing situation is pretty. I try not to think about it, but anyway, transportation in the U.S. Virtually no public transportation, if any. It's old or totally ineffective. Completely agree. You have to go by cars 99% of the time, and it usually takes 30 to 40 minutes to get to the nearest grocery store. Absolutely unnecessary and time-consuming. Gas prices. You have to constantly check your gas level and gas prices everywhere you go because they're different from gas station to gas station. So that's something we take for granted in the U.S. It's not the case in all countries. There's also no, you don't want to end up running out of gas near an expensive gas station. This is true. I mean, you can find gas prices ranging as widely as like $1.50, some places I've seen recently. So no street food. You're hungry and want some healthy, cheap street food? Too bad. It doesn't exist except for some food trucks. You can go to a gas station and buy some crappy overpriced corporate snack full of preservatives and sitting on a shelf for years, or stay hungry until you get home and cook something for yourself. Hotels are absolutely unaffordable. Airbnb is not much cheaper either. Car renting is lamau. I don't even want to think about it. You want to go traveling, better stay with friends or family members if you want to save a massive amount of money and just hope that they live in the area you're trying to visit and have room for you and you feel like spending time with them, and then vice versa. Propaganda, false COVID propaganda, right-wing propaganda, thin blue line flags, Confederate flags, don't tread on me flags are fucking everywhere. I'm terrified. TV channels and radio stations reek with capitalist xenophobic propaganda. That would be anti-China. I'm so sick of it. Houseless people and beggars are everywhere. I don't even know how they can survive here at all. There are virtually no neighborhood grocery stores or restaurants unless you live in an actual downtown, which is insanely crowded and expensive with $10 per hour parking places. Monthly fees for trash picking service, $60 in rural area. Internet is awful and you have to pay a shit ton of money for that crappy internet every month. Taxes on every single thing you buy, and they're nuts. 2 more screens here. Your life would only be great in the U.S. if you are rich as fuck or earn more than $100,000 a year, way more if you live in big cities. Don't have kids, your cars don't break, and you don't get sick ever. I miss my country's delicious and cheap street food where everything is walkable and affordable. Internet is like $7 to $10 a month and extremely high quality. The gas price is the same and affordable everywhere. Trash picking fee is $1 a month. A bowl of pho is $1.50. By the way, I just visited the U.S. There's no way I'm going to live here ever. In nearly 3 months visiting, I heard several mass shootings happened. Like you wake up in the morning, check the news, and be like, oh, just another mass shooting. Yeah, so this is true. There were almost 2 mass shootings a day in 2022. People are saying I'm lying in the comments. I swear to God, all I said was what I actually witnessed. I wasn't talking about online shopping. I was talking about visiting actual shops in the malls that I visited. I couldn't do online shopping because I don't have Americans' Visa cards. Since I heard some white people's fifis with my own experience in this country, I will say another fact. The nature is truly breathtaking. Very true. Actually, on the sort of U.S. is a shithole theme, let's swing over quickly. This is from Rolling Stone. Now, we've done things before on the channel about patriotic education in the U.S. and the sort of fascist distortion of the education agenda that's been going on for some time is now kind of reaching a fever pitch. But Florida has the Stop Woke Act. You're anti-woke, just say you're racist, okay? This story is a good example of that. And they use that to block an African American Studies program. So Florida says AP African American Studies program, quote, lacks educational value. Okay, it's history. It's just not the history of people, quote, we care about. The state used Ron DeSantis' Stop Woke Act to block the proposed program from its schools by Nikki McCann Ramirez. Florida has blocked the College Board from testing a pilot advanced placement African American Studies curriculum in the state under Governor Ron DeSantis' Stop Woke Act. According to a letter obtained by National Review, Florida's Department of Education's Office of Articulation said that the curriculum is, quote, inexplicably contrary to Florida law and significantly lacks educational value, unquote. So this is where we're at in this country as far as the crisis of capitalism and the inequality and social problems that it causes. Racism is so much needed by capitalists to maintain their unjust order, and people are so fed up with it that they're just trying to make it illegal to like discuss or learn about it in any kind of state-controlled institution. The pilot course, which has been tested at 60 schools across the U.S., aims to expand the advanced coursework offered by the College Board into the study of the African diaspora in the U.S. The course has run afoul of DeSantis' widespread ban on teaching, quote, critical race theory in K through 12 classrooms. We've covered the critical race theory thing before. Most of the people who are against it can't even define it, even slightly, sort of like socialism. And it's just sort of a blanket term for anything that even vaguely threatens white supremacy and capitalism in the U.S. CRT is an analytical framework that seeks to dissect the manner in which racism has shaped American legal theory and institutions. The concept has been co-opted in recent years by right-wing reactionaries to fearmonger about any and all discussions of race and discrimination. The Stop Woke Act, signed into law by DeSantis in 2022, essentially prohibits instruction on race relations or diversity that imply that a person's, quote, status as either privileged or oppressed is necessarily determined by his or her race, color, national origin, or sex. So they're basically, that makes it illegal to teach that racism is real, that one's status, either as privileged or oppressed, can be determined by race. That's bold. I mean, that is wild. I wonder how long that law will survive. The bill also bans both schools and workplaces from, quote, subjecting any student or employee to training or instruction that espouses, promotes, advances, inculcates, or compels such individuals to believe specified concepts, to believe that specified concepts constitutes discrimination based on race, color, sex, or national origin. So I think it's kind of a hop, skip, and a jump from here to sort of repealing protected categories. But In November, U.S. District Judge Mark E. Walker issued a temporary injunction on a portion of the law that attempted to place similar restrictions on higher education. Despite several challenges to the law on grounds of First Amendment rights, Florida has continued to lead the charge against comprehensive education on the racial history of the U.S. Several other states have passed similar legislation, including Texas, of course, Idaho, Tennessee, South Carolina, and Oklahoma. DeSantis has centered his administration around governance through culture war grievances. So let's just pause for a minute. I don't generally like the term culture war because there's, how do I say this? There's a lot of non-communists who will say things like, and this really gets into the fascist grifter opportunist space that is now pouring out of the former SOCDEM space, people like Jimmy Dore, things like that, that will say, they want you distracted with culture war things so that you don't notice the class war. To the extent that that statement is at all true, it basically exclusively applies to white supremacists who have sort of bought into that when they are working class and should be aligning with the rest of the proletariat against all of that stuff. It does not apply to the left. And because the culture war is an extension of the class war. And so that's why that sort of, culture war versus class war is kind of a false dichotomy. The culture war is an extension of the class war. So, and what is the culture war anyway? Things like racism and things like that, that's not a two-way street. That's not both sides do it. White supremacy is white supremacy. And it's anyway, maybe we can discuss this more in the chat, but that's something that definitely bugs me every time it comes up. The governor passed a similar law last year, known as the Don't Say Gay bill, that granted the state broad powers to implement prohibition on instruction on issues of gender and sexuality in Florida schools. Under the guise of his anti-CRT crusade, the governor is reshaping Florida education in the image of the far right, recently announcing a plan to forcibly overhaul the New College of Florida, transform it into a conservative institution, with increasing pressure on teachers and professors to avoid topics like race and gender, lest they face the wrath of the state government. That transformation is effectively taking place through government-enforced censorship. So that is accurate. And, there's a audiobook up on the channel. It's Fables for Proletarian Children. And it basically concerns a scenario in which all of the, as revolutions happen around the world, all of the reactionaries coalesce in the United States, which becomes this sort of haven for all the deposed monarchs and everything else. Things haven't played out exactly like that, but for decades, and while the international communist movement was in a stronger place as well, the U.S. really was serving as like a reactionary home base. And that sort of crusade that the U.S. has been on, of trying to preserve capitalism and be that, city on a hill, which is, of course, what it means is that they become a factory for fascism. Training the military, training the police, which oftentimes overlap, and training the people to be fascist shitbags and to accept just insanely oppressive system, and in the hopes of spreading that system and being a counterpower to, any left-wing movement in the world. This is pretty much, I think, just one manifestation of that plan. The forcible overhaul of the New College of Florida, transform it into a conservative institution. This is what they need to do, is set up the United States as a factory for fascists. I like people. I oftentimes don't like Americans. The kind of people that this country creates are not the greatest. As human beings, they still have potential to, unlearn a lot of that stuff, particularly younger people. But by the time they get old and get really settled in those ways, it can really take a lot to shake people out of being a fascist shitbag, which they have been conditioned and socialized into being for decades and decades. And even a lot of times then, they don't want to go all the way with it. So they'll realize, for example, that, I used to be better off and now I'm getting poor. I'm a socialist. But they don't want to do any of the other work to examine the racism that they have been taught to casually accept and uphold, and et cetera, et cetera. The United States, very, very frustrating place to live in. Now, let's get through a few more odds and ends before I get back to the chat. So, as a brief contrast, and we were talking about the advanced imperialist countries in general, France would definitely be one of those. However, one thing is that France has a much better culture of protest than the United States have. There are some reasons for this which stem outside from factors outside of the left itself. In the United States, for example, where we have a much weaker culture of protest, police can shoot you and things. The legal system is somewhat different, etc. That said, people just don't turn out on the streets. In the U.S., people don't organize. People are scared shitless. In general, people don't stand up for themselves as much for a variety of reasons in the U.S. But anyway, there's some pictures in here. This is an article by Michael Laxer from the Left Chapter, which offers socialism, opinion, history, and news. Mass strikes across France in opposition to Macron's attacks on pensions. And you can see an enormous amount of people turning out there. Hundreds of thousands of workers went on strike and marched in Paris and other cities and towns all across France in opposition to President Macron's push to, quote, reform or worsen pensions by raising the retirement age from 62 to 64, while also raising the number of years of work it takes to qualify for a pension. I've got to take a drink here. My throat's getting dry. That is better. According to the French Communist Party, or PCF, quote, more than 2 million people mobilized across France on January 19, participating in demonstrations against the pension reform, and major strikes have begun in many sectors. The PCF salutes the trade union organizations that organized this historic mobilization, which marks a huge success for this first step in the response to the government's project. Emmanuel Macron has challenged the country. The response of the French is powerful and clear. We do not want this pension reform. The move by Macron is deeply unpopular and opposed by 68% of the French public, according to recent polls. More strikes and protests are being called for January 23rd and 31st. The PCF is calling for Macron's proposals to be put to a referendum and is countering his reactionary plan with a call to lower the age for full retirement benefits to 60. That is a good way to do it. And then finally, just some more pictures from the demonstrations and rallies. These are things you need to keep the morale up of the left. Then within the left, you got to fight for ideological dominance, whether it's going to be communist, whether it's going to be reformist, whatever. But if you don't have the basic morale where people are willing to turn out on the streets and rally for the cause, you don't really have anything. You have people hiding in their houses and posting online. And anyway, the U.S. left has really got to fight its way out of that. Again, hoping by 2030 we have some turnaround and as well as more ideological penetration of Marxist thought by that time as well. So, by contrast in the U.S., let's look at a few things going on here. Briefly, some good news out of Trader Joe's. And if I can find it. There we go. So, the Louisville, Kentucky. Trader Joe's workers won a union. Congrats. So you can follow them at Trader Joe's Unite. I don't have too much more, but I wanted to give that a mention in this stream. In the last stream, we were also talking about tenants unions. And so there is, actually, before I put that up, the Autonomous Tenants Union. I wanted to give a mention to. Autonomous Tenants Union Network at ATUN_RSIA. That's a mouthful. At ATUN_RSIA on Twitter. They're tenants unions building power through organizing, rent strikes, and eviction defense. They joined Twitter in 2020, and they had a convention last summer. You can see some pictures from that. And so apparently this is a variety of different tenants unions that are organizing in this network of autonomous tenants union, groups. Well, it's a network. So it's a network of individual unions. So I did want to follow up on this with an article. This is by Julian Francis Park, who I don't know, but it says Communist Strategies for the Tenants Movement, a Debate. I wanted to at least take a look at this since it did come up in the last stream. So there's a picture there. The ATUN Convention Party winds down on the block of the 2nd Street Tenants Association in Boyle Heights, Los Angeles, June 25th, 2022. So there's your caption. Now, it begins on Sunday, June 26, 2022, the second day of the first convention of the Autonomous Tenant Union Network, occurring in the flesh. Two comrades from the Bay Area's tenant and neighborhood councils engaged in a brief debate over communist strategy, which opened into a larger discussion. The convention program described what was to occur as follows. Let's get into that. Quote, this session will begin with two tenant union comrades from TANC debating tenant movement strategy based on respective places they have written. Those would be buying time, evictions, and tenant organizing at the pandemic's slow end, and abolish rent for a communist tenants movement. What is the most essential element of a communist tenant movement strategy? The content of rent abolition or the form of the tenant union? After this brief debate, they will facilitate general discussion on communist strategy for the tenant movement. So there's a recording of the debate and discussion at the link there if you want to hear that. We're not going to play that right now, but I will read the rest of the commentary on this. Those in the autonomous unionist tendency of the tenants movement increasingly agree on our ultimate objective, rent abolition or the end of landlordism, etc. This rising consensus, a generalizing communist orientation in a significant part of the movement, has at least three interrelated causes. First, the proliferation of tactics like rent strikes, land and home expropriation, and which I guess would be tied in with things like squatting and things like that, and to a lesser extent, anti-landlord sabotage, which variously challenged the social relation of rent. Second, the near-universal adoption by the broader tenants movement of the pandemic demand to cancel rent. And third, the deliberate cultivation by movement participants of the discourse of rent abolition, partially in recognition of, but also anticipating, the vistas opened up by the aforementioned situations. With communist ends for the movement, it is the task of militants to develop strategic means to match. Among self-described socialists, communists, and anarchists in our movement, whom for the sake of simplicity I will call communists, there are at least four strategic positions. So, time out. Of course, as Marxist-Leninists here, calling all socialists, communists, and anarchists communists is sloppy at best. I would definitely push back on that. We would call that the broader left, for sure. You could call them leftists. I don't know about communists necessarily. If we could, bring them all around through ideological struggle to actually what we would recognize as more communist positions, that would be great. But yeah, definitely trying to gatekeep the term communist a little. That actually means something. Continuing. There are at least four strategic positions. There are those who emphasize social housing and the path through state power, the statists. Again, that's incredibly sloppy and just, again, it's time to outgrow anarchism and words like statism because there are two really distinct things here. There is the anarchist idea, which is flawed and incorrect, that the state is the problem. The state is not fundamentally the problem. The state is a product of class society. So what we have today is a capitalist state reflecting the needs of the ruling class, the capitalists. Every time that a new ruling class takes power, that's a revolution. They set up a new state to mind their interests and advance their concerns. Okay? So the anarchists want to just tear down the state and not replace it with anything. This is not what Marxists want to do. We want to replace it with a workers' state. This is something that goes back to Marx and Engels. This isn't like a Leninist, quote, revision of Marx. Not at all. Marx and Engels wrote a lot against anarchists who, existed in their time. You don't have to guess what their positions were. They wrote about them. So there's this sort of anarchist mistake of we need to just abolish the state and things will be fine. And then there is also the social democratic mistake of we can keep the capitalist state and just sort of use it for our purposes. And then there's the Marxist-Leninist position of we need to abolish the parasite state and read State and Revolution, because that's what it's all about. And I feel like a lot of people could stop being anarchists by simply understanding the State and Revolution. So yeah. Anyway, those who emphasize building tenant unions toward the development of independent proletarian institutions, the base builders, those who, already this thing is losing me. So this is on people's radars now. If you want to, I'll put the link in the description as always. But this article has, we got a lot to cover, and yeah. But if you're interested in some of what's going on in the tenants movement, as we were discussing before, a lot of the activism in the U.S. is anarchist-led. This really needs to change. One of the differences is, with anarchists, there's a lot more individual activism. With socialists and communists, there's going to be a lot more party activity. Our parties are not in the kind of shape they need to be in, let's put it that way. But, a lot of the sort of how-to organizing manuals that you will find online will be written from a DIY anarchist thing, because, again, it is more individually oriented. And we need to be shifting towards more of a party-based, method of doing things and rediscovering that. I'll just leave you with those my thoughts, and you can read the rest of this on your own time if you want. Okay. So that said, before we get back into the chat, switching gears, you know what? Actually, I was going to cover a fun thing. Let's just skip it. I'm going to get back into the chat because I don't think we have time for it. I'll just I'll make a community post about this other thing I was going to do. Fair enough. Like I said, the Wednesday streams tend to be sharper. I'm sort of redoing a lot of stuff. It's not as fresh as it normally is, but we're gonna make the best of it. All right. So continuing, and please don't post anything that you don't need to post in the chat. Let's put it that way. I read through it sequentially, and at this point, I'm not going to get to your comment for like a long time. All right. Libertarians always hyper-focus on taxes, but what siphons more money than any taxes is high rents, fuel cost if you need to drive a car, general cost of living, and of course, general capitalist exploitation. Not to mention the ruling class pays fewer taxes than you or I do. Yeah, libertarians are misled at best, deeply confused people. I had like a conversation with a libertarian recently just for shits and giggles on Twitter. He literally kept, no matter what I said, kept trying to make it about taxes. There was absolutely no getting through to this guy. So yeah. It's crazy how many so-called leftists are acting like COVID is a scam. Yes, that's completely unscientific. It just flies in the face of all of the knowledge we have about the virus. What's up, comrades? Remember, we could solve hunger, but capitalism forces the destruction of good food to keep prices low. Yeah, you can see this at the beginning of the pandemic, they were doing it. Dumping milk. There were like mountains of potatoes. It looked like a quarry, with the big stacks of gravel and stuff, but it was potatoes. Hold on a second. Anyway, yeah, they were making like big piles of potatoes that they were just dumping, because if they actually went out there with the quantity that they had, the prices would just fall to nothing if they dumped all these potatoes on the market for sale. So yeah, we could be hunger would be a thing of the past, but yeah, capitalists need to keep prices high. Yeah, you wrote to keep prices low. It's actually the opposite. So I knew there was something wrong with that comment. It took me a minute to figure out what it was. Have you noticed how anti-vaxxers are going after Greta Thunberg now? Any insight on that? I have not seen that, and no. I mean, the right wing hates Greta Thunberg. Anybody who talks about big problems, capitalism, racism, social inequality, climate change, that's probably going to kill us all within a lot of our lifetimes. COVID, which is killing us now, definitely within our lifetimes, and destroying our immune systems to kill us in about 10, 15 years. They hate it when you talk about problems. So, I mean, I'm not surprised, you know. Oh, somebody says that was me who told you about Red Fightback. Yes, the party is dead. That is very unfortunate what happened. And yes, talking about CPGBML and Omfug, Yoti Brar from the UK Communist Party goes on Maupin's show. That was one of the first things actually that I saw. There was a viewer actually who pointed that out to me before I really knew that much about the scene that S4A was entering. Again, I was just somebody who wanted to do some more reading, and that was one of the things, the sort of the anti-trans stuff that was going on there between Maupin and Brar. So is what it is. I think I have just actually lost. I don't know why, but my Twitch window is freezing up. Oh wait, I think it's fixed now. All right, we've overcome the chat glitches. Yesterday is Stop the Red Menace, and now it's Wokeness. What will capitalism come up with next as a new boogeyman? Well, as we were talking about in the Lost Stream, also terrorism. We spent about 10, 15 years, everything was terrorism. You know, so it's like they just come up with everything that, you know, that made no sense. They come up with anything that they, you know, think might be useful. And the public is so willing to just lap it up. You know, here's your new enemy of the year, hate them. And so many people just do it. What we need to do is organize and really articulate sensible counter narratives that have real explanatory power and continue, you know, building material power in the communities as well. U.S. proletariat is a sleeping giant. Remember George Floyd's reaction? France could never equal that in scale. Well, France is a much smaller country in terms of population. The problem is that the U.S. proletariat spends most of its time asleep. So, I mean, you know, what was the last thing before the BLM protests in 2020? Yeah, it's a sleeping giant. It's more like comatose. So, I don't know, you know. I was hoping in 2020 that that would be sort of the beginning of more. And it I don't even know what to say. Like, I'm completely flabbergasted. You know, that was like a Jerry Lewis bit. I was just, I can't form words to describe how fucking disappointed I am. And, you know, that said, you know, history's full of surprises. We'll see what when the next uprising is. But right now I see people just, the U.S. proletariat is just getting punched in the face repeatedly and just kind of standing there dazed. I don't know what it's going to take to get people to snap the fuck out of it and fight back. But it's pretty depressing to watch in the meantime. Speaking of shaking people out of being fascist shitbags, one of my oldish, 57 years old, and unfortunately fascist shitbag family members, when it came right down to talking about Marxism with them, they just flat out said, "I'm too old to change how I think." That shit is such a cop-out. It sure is. So they basically just abandoned their intellect. They're just like, well, I'm no longer responsible for my thoughts. I've been on autopilot since, 1985. Whatever. Fucking losers. It's such a cowardly position. But yeah, I mean, they're a dime a dozen. So many online, quote, anarchists are just radlibs who don't want to be held accountable for their shitty actions. Yes. I've been lambasted by anarchists on Twitter for 2 days over a meme about MLs having carried out the only meaningfully successful revolutions. Yeah, they really hate that. Most, if not all, anti-vaxxers are also climate change denialists. This is true. Also to note that the German coup that was being planned had the Minister of Health as a target of kidnapping, getting that COVID focus to fuel the fash machine. Thank you, Yu Liang. I have a story about that. Let's go read that right now. So, as we have covered many times, COVID is not just a disease that attacks your lungs. Any tissue that has ACE2 receptors, which would include basically all of your major organs, your brain, your heart, your lungs, your liver, your intestines, male reproductive system, kidneys, etc., gets directly infected by the SARS coronavirus 2 virus. And also your T cells get infected by a different route, not so much the ACE2 receptor. I forget off the top of my head the name of the receptor. It's irrelevant for this audience anyway. But so COVID, or SARS coronavirus 2, is the only virus that we know of, other than HIV, that attacks and kills T cells. There are other viruses that can turn T cells cancerous, but as far as just straight up murdering them, it's COVID and HIV AIDS. So that's starting to get more traction because your T cell counts can rebound, but it's sort of a complicated process by which that happens. You're born with a certain amount of T cells, they mature, you retain some naive T cells. Anyway, but basically you need to protect your T cells because they do all kinds of things, fighting infection and fighting cancer, really critical stuff that can kill you in 10 or 15 years if things get way backed up on you that your T cells would normally be maintaining for you. So anyway, this is the German Minister of Health, Lauterbach. This is from NTV. I want my January 21st, 2023. The headline is Studies Give Cause for Concern. Lauterbach warns of incurable immune deficiency caused by coronavirus. Anyone who gets infected with corona more often runs the risk of developing an incurable immune deficiency. According to Health Minister Lauterbach, this is indicated by various studies that are currently being further researched. As a result, the risk of chronic diseases such as dementia would increase. According to Federal Minister of Health Karl Lauterbach, several corona infections in one person can have serious consequences for the immune system. Quote, "It is worrying what we observe in people who have had several corona infections. Studies now show very clearly that those affected are often dealing with an immune deficiency that can no longer be cured," said Lauterbach of the Düsseldorf Rheinische Post. Continuing the quote, "This can be a risk factor for the development of chronic diseases, from cardiovascular problems to dementia," emphasized the minister. "As I said, it's not yet certain." Actually, I would say it's pretty certain. I'm not sure why he's like couching it in these terms exactly, but it is being intensively researched. I follow the studies and discuss them with experts. This shows that if someone has a severely aged immune system after 2 infections, it is advisable that they avoid further COVID infections. Also, I would add, it's advisable not to have a severely aged or withered immune system in the first place. So, I would avoid the first 2 infections as well. Speaking to the newspaper, the minister also announced a major initiative for people with long COVID. Quote, "For example, a hotline will be set up in my ministry in a timely manner. It's intended to serve as a contact point for people who are looking for information about long COVID," said the SPD politician. He also wants to fund so-called healthcare research with 100 million euros in the future in order to improve the situation of those suffering from long COVID. The aim is to find out what the optimal care concept is for those affected. Lauterbach appeals to carnival organizers. Quote, "We assume that a relevant proportion of those who fall ill after a corona infection are struggling with long COVID symptoms. Estimates assume 5 to 10%. And I would just add that it's probably closer to 15 to 20, but anyway. For the individual, this often means a hard blow of fate and can even become relevant for the labor market. I mean, that's already the case. So again, he's couching it in these like highly, just very tepid, highly qualified statements. We've covered things already where in 2022, 6-7 months ago, it was already estimated that a third of all unfilled job positions in the U.S. were due to long COVID. That a third of the unfilled positions were because there just weren't people who could be out there working in them. Anyway, so this is already pretty well known. If the number of sick people continues to rise, or already, or even 6 months or a year ago, explained the minister. In view of the upcoming carnival celebrations, Lauterbach asked the organizers to offer corona tests for indoor meetings. At the Oktoberfest in Munich, we saw how not to do it, he told the newspaper. I therefore appeal to the organizers of carnival sessions to offer tests so that all people go to the event tested. This can be easily accomplished using mobile test units, said the minister. It's affordable for the organizers and creates significantly more security. So I would say very, very criminally mild conclusions and solutions being offered there. However, he does note the elephant in the room of COVID-induced immune damage. This is a major concern. People need to get up on this. Actually, so let's continue with this for just a minute. I have a few other COVID-related odds and ends. This is from Dr. Satoshi Akima on Twitter, and linking a study from Nature, immunological dysfunction persists for 8 months following initial mild to moderate COVID. So he says, as a clinician, I've seen young patients die of sepsis from atypical organisms with lymphopenia weeks after acute COVID. Sepsis is a septic condition of the body. It's total overrun of the body with bacteria, pathogenic organisms, from atypical organisms. So things that you don't normally see causing these kinds of infections just running amok in the body. And so it's patients with lymphopenia. What penia means a lack, and this is lymphocytes, so white blood cells. So patients having acute COVID, then developing a lack of immune cells, and then dying of sepsis from atypical organisms. So sepsis is not something you typically have to worry about if you have a functional immune system. What we're saying here is the people who have had the long COVID don't. I've seen deaths from TB, tuberculosis, and endocarditis. I've treated multidermatomal shingles. I routinely look out for post-COVID lymphopenia, and he has a thread going there. What else do we have? A couple of short pieces related to this. So here is something I want to mention. We talk about T cells a fair amount. There is T cell exhaustion that can be induced by COVID. There is T cell death that can be caused by COVID, just direct infection and death of the T cell. Also, the T cells can be exhausted and worn down by the COVID. Even if they live, they will be out of commission for some time and not able to properly function. This is a study actually from 2 years ago, September 2021. The headline is, or the title is, SARS coronavirus 2 infection causes immunodeficiency in recovered patients by downregulating CD19 expression in B cells via enhancing B cell metabolism. So we talk a lot about T cells. Your B cells and your T cells are like the two pillars of this part of your immune system. And so this is the first that I had seen. This gets talked about less, but the impact of COVID on your B cells. Let's just read the abstract. The SARS coronavirus 2 infection causes severe immune disruption. That's interesting. This is from September 2021. Oh, I said 2 years. Sorry. Year and a quarter. My bad. The SARS coronavirus 2 infection causes severe immune disruption. However, it's unclear if the disrupted immune regulation still exists and pertains in recovered COVID-19 patients. So this is people who didn't necessarily have long COVID, but just have it and recover. But in our study, I think, actually, let's hang on to that possible interpretation for a minute. In our study, we have characterized the immune phenotype of B cells from 15 recovered COVID-19 patients and found that healthy controls and recovered patients had similar B cell populations before and after BCR stimulation, but the frequencies of PBC in patients were significantly increased when compared to healthy controls before stimulation. However, the percentage of unswitched memory B cells was decreased in recovered patients, but not changed in healthy controls upon BCR stimulation. So this is actually getting pretty technical. We're going to put a bookmark in this and come back to it. I want to know more about the effects of COVID on B cells. We know that it is pretty catastrophic on the T cells. But so just to read the conclusion, in conclusion, we found that SARS coronavirus 2 infection causes immunodeficiency in recovered patients by downregulating CD19 expression in B cells via enhancing B cell metabolism, which may provide a new intervention target to cure COVID-19, probably if you have a lot of money. Two other quick things on this, actually. Two quick things and a really quick thing. Here's one about teachers. This is where we're at. Welcome to the start of year 4 of COVID. The teachers and kids are not okay. COVID is not over. Retweeting or quote tweeting Meg Conley. Just got an email that 23 teachers at the middle school have COVID. Not one substitute could be found to cover them. The school may close if, which is to say when, more teachers get sick. We're not caring for teachers, parents, or kids. Still. So here we are, the beginning of the 4th year of the pandemic. Biden has done let it rip, mask or vax, get back to school, get back to work, no more testing, etc., etc. It's not going well. It's not going well at all. Let's get into the first thing here. Long COVID. Who will get long COVID? Short piece. This is from USC News. Long COVID affects 23% of positive cases, causing symptoms in long haulers that may last for months. This was an interdisciplinary USC study that also revealed some predictors of long COVID by Leigh Hopper here. A new USC study finds that 23% of people infected with COVID will become long haulers. And it also identifies predictors of who is likely to develop the sometimes debilitating symptoms that can last for months, and in some cases even longer than a year. The research, which appears in scientific reports, is unique because it accounts for pre-existing symptoms such as fatigue and sneezing that are common to other conditions and may be mistaken for COVID symptoms. Quote, long COVID is a major public health concern. 23% is a very high prevalence, and it may translate to millions of people, said first author Chiao Wu, a doctoral candidate at the USC Leonard Davis School of Gerontology. More knowledge on its prevalence, persistent symptoms, and risk factors may help healthcare professionals to allocate resources and services to help long haulers get back to normal lives. The work finds that obesity and hair loss at the time of infection are predictors of long COVID, but that other underlying conditions such as diabetes or smoking status have no discernible link to long-lasting symptoms. Interesting. Long COVID. Symptoms last 12 weeks or longer. While SARS coronavirus 2 is typically an acute illness lasting about 3 weeks, some people with COVID will have symptoms that last months or longer. The World Health Organization defines long COVID as symptoms that last 12 weeks or longer, a definition that the study's authors also used. Estimates of the prevalence of long COVID range from 10% to 90% due to evolving diagnostic criteria, how you diagnose it, and differences in study design. So this is why you get some people like, oh, it's 5% of people, No, I think the most consistent numbers I've seen is like 15 to 20. So that's what I stick with. But yeah, some people say more because they define it more broadly, and then that catches more people. You know, let's say between 10 and 20% is a very, very fair number. I would put it at the upper end of that range. But that's what we're talking about when we talk about long COVID. And I really want to emphasize, this is something we covered in the last stream, that 90% of cases where people got long COVID had mild symptoms up front. So the overwhelming majority of people who got long COVID and still had symptoms months and months out had a mild acute case up front. I can't emphasize this enough. All right. Although, that said, having a severe case up front also makes you much more likely, particularly, or specifically, I should say, if it's severe enough that you get hospitalized, your odds roughly double or more, or triple, of getting the long COVID. So you want to avoid the severe disease, get vaccinated, wear a mask, limit your exposure, and, because if you get hospitalized, you have, I think, majority chances, like you're more likely than not to get long COVID at that point. Anyway, continuing. For example, some studies have focused on hospitalized patients, which provided a limited perspective on long COVID in the broader non-hospitalized population. USC researchers used an internet-based national survey, the Understanding Coronavirus in America Tracking Survey, conducted by the Center for Economic and Social Research at the USC Dornsife College of Letters, Arts, and Sciences, with an estimated 8,000 respondents from across the country. From March 2020 to March 2021, researchers invited participants to answer biweekly questions about COVID. Their final sample included 308 infected, non-hospitalized individuals who were interviewed 1 month before, around the time of infection, and 12 weeks later. Who will get long COVID? Long haulers describe symptoms. After accounting for pre-existing symptoms, about 23% of the participants reported that they had experienced new onset symptoms during infection, so things they had not had before, which lasted for more than 12 weeks, meeting the study's definition of long COVID. Hang on a minute, background noise. All right, much better. The new onset persistent symptoms, no, skipped a sentence. They reported that they had experienced new onset symptoms during infection, which lasted for more than 12 weeks, meeting the study's definition of long COVID. The new onset persistent symptoms most commonly experienced by long COVID patients were headache, runny or stuffy nose, abdominal discomfort, fatigue, and diarrhea. In addition, those aren't necessarily the debilitating, I can't go to work anymore, or like wash my clothes kind of, symptoms. Although the fatigue possibly could be, and some of the other ones, if they're severe enough, also could be, such as headache and so on. But, for like the cognitive dysfunction is not on that list. So those are the most common, not necessarily completely life impairing. You could probably struggle through those with reduced quality of life. But anyway, continuing. In addition, the researchers found that people had significantly higher odds of experiencing long COVID if at the time of infection they were obese, experienced hair loss. This is one of the things that can happen with COVID, is cause hair loss. Had experienced headache, experienced a sore throat. Unexpectedly, the odds of long COVID among people who experienced chest congestion were lower. There was a lack of evidence relating the risk of long COVID to pre-existing health conditions such as diabetes or asthma, or age, gender, race, ethnicity, education, or current smoking status. Now that's really interesting because everything that we've seen before says that long COVID is much higher in women than men. And I've wondered if this is a gender bias in medicine and lack of reporting sort of situation. But this is saying that there was not a lack of evidence relating the risk of long COVID to gender. So anyway, that's the first time I've heard that. Everything else has put women about like 30 to 50% more likely. Anyway, continuing, the significant association between long COVID and obesity is consistent with previous studies, said University professor Eileen Crimmins, a demographer at the USC Leonard Davis School. We differ from some existing studies in that we didn't find a link between long COVID and any socio-demographic factors. I would say not just some studies, but most studies. That was interesting. So let's go on to the next thing about long COVID here. Estimates of long COVID are startlingly high. Here's how to understand them. This is from Stat News by Elizabeth Cooney. Again, it's from last summer, July. Think about the adults you know who have had COVID. Does 1 out of every 5 have long COVID, as the CDC estimates? Asking that question should in no way diminish the suffering of people who thought they were done with their infections, only to find their return to well-being still beyond reach. But knowing how many people are living with that bitter legacy of COVID-19 and who among working-age adults can't work or care for their families is critical to their care and to the health of our society. It's important to remember, so already there's a, we're not trying to minimize. Well, we'll see in reading through the article. We'll be the judge of that in reading the article. It's important to remember that long COVID is an evolving umbrella term for an array of symptoms that vary in number and degree. Some housebound people are assailed by brain fog that completely robs them of concentration. This roughly happened to me, like through most of 2021. I had really, it was like I would have a thought. I mean, I was able to do things around it, but it was a significant impairment I have never experienced before. It cleared up around a year later. So that was like a year of my life where I couldn't think straight. And it significantly impaired my ability to do some projects I was working on. While others find that memory aids help them get through their workdays. Some former athletes can't complete a 6-minute walk test, while others can gradually return to activity if they monitor their heart rate. Long COVID clinics that adapt techniques from rehabilitation medicine see people eventually get better. In a world transitioning away from bustling downtowns to hybrid work-from-home status, we may not always see who's missing. Whatever long COVID's toll turns out to be, it'll be too many people. Whether you gather or analyze the data, experts told Stat, the proportion of people whose troublesome, sometimes disabling symptoms linger after their acute COVID-19 infections clear is sizable and worrying. It's the cruelty of large numbers. Even if the actual prevalence of long COVID is smaller than recent estimates, a small percentage of a huge number is still a large number. And yet, the U.S. has for months been operating in a nearly normal fashion. Yes, this was the crime, the sin, the evil of 2022 was operating as if the pandemic was over. Just to put BioBot up on the screen for a minute, here's BioBot from that time, from July. Very, very, very clearly not over. There was a sustained outbreak, and this doesn't even have the spike that went up in late July into August. So you have a sustained plateau that's as bad as far as the wastewater goes as the November to February 2020-2021 outbreak. Yet everything was just rolling along as per normal. All right, where were we? Nope, that was on the previous one. There we go. So, what could explain this discrepancy between estimates and common experience? It's eerily similar to the pandemic's early days when people asked one another if they knew anyone who had caught the coronavirus, followed more than 2 years later by the flip side, knowing few people who hadn't been infected and no one who hasn't been exposed. Here are some factors that make the current range of estimates easier to understand. And let me add here, we did I think it was just the last live stream, all of the COVID stuff that didn't fit into the year-end summary. We did an article on stigma. A lot of people who have long COVID don't want to talk about it because they have talked about it once and they experienced stigma and they don't want to repeat that experience. So you probably know people with long COVID who don't want to talk about it or are afraid of talking about it, and probably for good reason. Okay. First, what are the numbers? The 20% figure from a recent CDC analysis of millions of health records implies that tens of millions of Americans, a fifth of people infected with COVID, have at least one lingering post-infection symptom that is seriously affecting their daily life. Compared to other estimates, like an April meta-analysis that puts global long COVID at closer to 50%, or a June household survey from the CDC saying 1 in 3, it's even on the low side. Nathan Prashan, a psychiatry researcher at Massachusetts General Hospital, trusts it, calling the more rigorous CDC studies epidemiology among the best he's seen because for over a year it used a control group to tease out COVID effects. Still, he thinks it might have missed some people who don't show up in medical records because remember, this is the U.S., terrible, expensive healthcare coverage that a lot of people, has a lot of people not going to see a doctor. Long COVID is defined by symptoms, psychiatric disorders, and cognitive problems, to name two, that could make finding care more difficult, as would the same social determinants of health that mean that COVID infection is more likely in some populations in the first place. So to quote him, 1 in 5 may actually be an underestimate, not an overestimate. What about different definitions? CDC's versus the WHO's, for example. The CDC defines long COVID, which it calls post-COVID conditions, as symptoms lasting 4 weeks after the first infection. The World Health Organization starts the clock ticking after 3 months. That was the 12 weeks we just read about. Prashan said that it makes sense to be inclusive, as in, on the earlier side, while data are still being collected, to avoid missing important information from these patients. Also, there may be differences in the data. While some UK studies relied on records that a national health system provides, others culled responses from a smartphone app, asking people about their post-COVID symptoms. That limits the respondents to people who have smartphones and are also motivated to report how they're feeling. The CDC reports large numbers give power to the analysis, senior epidemiologist Laura Bull-Otterson told STAT. While all studies have limitations, we believe the strengths of the data and the analysis are solid and are also supported by prior research, she said. Future research is always needed to support and expand on the findings of this study. Bruce Levy, chief of pulmonary and critical care medicine at Brigham and Women's Hospital, doesn't think the 20% estimate is rock solid, noting how studies have varied widely in the U.S. and in other parts of the world. Quote, even if it's in single digits at the end of the day, once a formal case definition and a true prevalence study can be accomplished, it's still a lot of people, but it's very hard to pinpoint a solid number. If the size of the CDC study is impressive, the source of the data has limits, said epidemiologist Priya Duggal of Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Patient records reflect only the people who sought care and whose symptoms were coded in their charts. Such data don't include people who didn't have access to health care, didn't seek it, or gave up thinking that there was no help for their crazy quilt of symptoms. That long COVID, I mean, if you look it up, there's like over 100 symptoms. So it may not have made sense to them, and they might have just given up like, I'm sick with some random thing, I'm going to die, whatever, and so they're not seeking treatment and getting that coded in their medical records, which then can't be studied. It doesn't mean that the data is not right. It doesn't mean that what we're looking at isn't important. It just means that there's a different group of people that you might be looking at. Even with caveats, she finds the data pretty consistent for a range of 20% to 30% of people experiencing long COVID symptoms. It's still a substantial number of people. To me, that's the take-home point. The second point is that it's real. Long COVID is a constellation of diseases that manifest differently. Symptoms linked to long COVID hit bodies from head to toe: brain fog, fatigue, shortness of breath, digestive problems, and muscle weakness. The symptoms vary in severity and number, depending on the study, but most patients don't necessarily have all of them. Some patients don't have debilitating fatigue, but they might report persistent digestive problems they didn't have before getting COVID. So why would that matter? Well, if every time you eat something, which again is usually going to be multiple times a day, you're having pain, bloating, inflammation, maybe you have to use the bathroom more often at really inopportune times, that's a major quality of life impairment right there. Also, to the extent that it is functionally impacting your digestion. That's potentially a problem for getting nutrients into your blood system, or your bloodstream, sorry. Like I said, a little less sharp than I was on Wednesday. But you know what I'm saying? It's not just uncomfortable. It may also be reducing the amount of nutrition that's actually getting to your body's cells. Continuing. Some long COVID might be something else. With long COVID so disparate and common, it is possible that some doctors are misattributing symptoms to long COVID. I think it's probably more likely the other way around, but granted, it's a logical possibility. And they're missing the diagnosis of a different disease. Or because life-saving measures in intensive care units can be like a train wreck for the body, it's hard to tease out the treatment from the disease. Some long COVID is hidden to bystanders. Let me just add, that applies if you were in the ICU. Most people aren't. Anyway, some long COVID is hidden to bystanders. Some of it is going to be visible, like, oh, they're weak, they're sickly, they can't walk, they can't go upstairs, Douglas said. Then there's also long COVID where you have kidney damage now, and the average person walking down the street doesn't know they have kidney damage. She's heard people that say that they don't know anyone who has long COVID. I'm like, yeah, you probably do. Finally, long COVID isn't all debilitating. The CDC definitions capture thousands who fit the worst case image of long COVID, formerly healthy people who can no longer function. I will also add that after this article came out, there was a CDC official statement that estimated, this seems extraordinarily low to me, but 3,500 people, I think, who had died from long COVID. Now, it's probably much more than that. We know, for example, there have been numerous population studies, well, I don't know numerous, but multiple population studies, again, looking at depersonalized health records by like the millions in other countries. There was one in Latvia or Estonia. Anyway, looked at over 1 million people and found that if you had COVID in the last 12 months, you were more likely to die in that following year after getting COVID than people who didn't get COVID. So, I mean, it's a risk factor directly for dying in the next 12 months, for example. But anyway, the CDC definitions capture thousands who fit the worst case image, but its prevalence estimate also includes anyone reporting at least one symptom. Bruce Walker, director of the Reagan Institute of Massachusetts General Hospital, MIT, and Harvard, reminded reporters on a recent call, estimates may also capture a worsening pre-COVID condition like asthma, an important consideration for the many people with underlying conditions before they caught COVID. Finally, what's next? Bull Otterson of the CDC urged routine screening for long COVID and better defining it so that risk factors could be identified and treatments devised. The impact of vaccination and the wild card of variants also needs to be understood. So this is like a problem that can't be emphasized enough. This is a novel virus, and a new dominant strain is appearing every 2 to 3 months. Every time that we get data about what's going on with COVID, it's already out of date, to at least some extent, because they're studying the effects of the strain that hit 6 to 12 months ago. And those are the studies coming out now. So we now understand, BA1 Omicron. We now understand Delta, but it doesn't matter because they're extinct. What we don't understand yet is XBB 1.5. We barely understand BA4 and BA5, and they're already extinct. So this is one of the things actually that just came out this week, Novavax, which is a non-mRNA vaccine. It's more of a traditional type vaccine for COVID. I have heard very good things about it, and I would recommend it to anybody who qualifies for it based off of what I read. Or I mean, I can't recommend it. Recommend that you read about it. Check it out. That's really all I'm trying to say here. But yeah, look at Novavax. It's not getting much publicity, but check it out. Especially if you're averse to the mRNA stuff, which that is definitely overblown, the risks of the mRNAs. But it is not an mRNA, so now you really have no excuse to get vaccinated. Go look into the Novavax thing because you have another option now. Anyway, They're saying that the Novavax was effective against the BA4 and BA5 strains, and there was new information about that. The problem is those are on the way out now. So XBB 1.5 is coming in, and that's like our new Omicron. It's probably likely to set up shop and create a whole bunch of successor strains, and we just don't know. Will the Novavax be effective against that too, or what? There's another point about this. I'll get into a minute about original antigenic sin. I'll come right back to that. Original antigenic sin, this is basically where your immune system imprints with the first version of the virus that you confront, and then it has trouble adapting itself to later versions. But we'll come right back to that. I just want to finish these paragraphs here. Long COVID has the potential to widen existing gaps in health, Linda Sprague Martinez of the Boston University School of Social Work said on a video call with reporters, pointing to a map of counties with high case numbers but few long COVID clinics. We don't want to wait, she said. Getting ahead of it will be really important to us. So yeah, we're fucking around with a virus that is changing all the time and just letting it rip. And we won't know what the impact was on people for 6 to 12 months later. It's so massively irresponsible, I don't even have words for it. Okay, what can we say now? Estimates of long COVID will certainly evolve and perhaps be refined into the systems they affect: cardiopulmonary, digestive, musculoskeletal, or neurological, including autonomic powers that control breathing, heart rate, and other unconscious functions. Hey, anybody, what is a system of the body that we've been talking about today in this stream that they didn't mention? The immune system. Kind of vital for keeping all the other systems going. If, as experts say, there is an inevitability to catching COVID now, because we're not controlling it, exclusively because we are not controlling it, experts say that there's an inevitability. Yeah, that's like saying if you go outside in a rainstorm without an umbrella, there is an inevitability that you're getting wet. What's the alternative? Carry a large umbrella, wear some rain boots. You're much less likely to get wet, and if you do get wet, it will just be a few drops. See how that works? I'm an expert on rain now. Long COVID will likely follow in some proportion of cases, disabling some further fraction of those people. Let me just also add, there is no end in sight. None whatsoever. We looked at the BioBot, it's just going and going, and it's just going to keep plateauing, and people are they're going to keep spreading it, and it's going to keep mutating, and people will keep getting sick a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh, and eighth time. There is no built-in end to this that we can see. There's no reason to think it's going to stop on its own. You don't stop diseases by letting them spread. You stop them by stopping the spread. So, will we still be dealing with COVID in 2025 if the current strategies continue to be applied? I see no reason why we wouldn't. In fact, by then it may be really severe. Because again, there's a new mutation coming in, becoming dominant like every 2 or 3 months. What will it be by then? It's already significantly worse now than it was before. It's more transmissible. It's more immune evasive. What will it be 2 years from now? I know that's not a pleasant thought, but it's something we have to think about. And if this doesn't make you want to get political about this, check your pulse. Like, I don't know, what's going on. All right. Recent studies suggest that COVID infections precede the risk of certain other chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes, but the mechanism isn't clear. That's not true at all. COVID attacks the pancreas. We covered that like over a year ago. Even if the world wasn't ready for one pandemic, it has to deal with its after effects somehow. And as I've said before, is the world more or less ready for the next pandemic? What I see is less, because there is a pandemic raging right now. I haven't updated the BioBot in a week or two, but let's just look at a recent biobot. This is from a couple of weeks ago, but here, this one's from a month ago. There you go. Does that look over? Why would this like suddenly stop on its own? Anyway, it's just tragic. But so we got a pandemic raging. People have pretty much given up on doing anything about it. Let's say another disease hits. Like, people at this point are trained to just ignore it. So I think we're less ready to deal with the next pandemic, not more. Quote, we see people still 2 years out having long-term symptoms. So if that's true, and people can continue to get infected, this is going to be with us for quite a while, Douglas said. All right, I'm going to take just a real quick break. I got one more thing to read. I'll be back in just a second. We'll read the last thing, and then we will go back into the chat. All right, so the last thing that we've got on COVID, then we'll go into the chat, and then we will change topics and do some other articles, long stream today, is something about our old buddy Jeff Zients. So we did a story about this guy. This was Biden's COVID czar in 2021, and he has no background in public health. He was in Bain Capital, the place that Mitt Romney came from, that basically Obama ran against for president in 2012. So that was like, super bad to be from Bain Capital per the Democrats in 2012. And then literally he's like the head of the pandemic response under Biden. So there's the Democrats for you, trying to have some consistency. They're completely controlled by big capital, just like the Republicans. Slightly different factions, but not really that much. Anyway, we did an article about firing Jeff Zients and, trying to raise a demand for getting rid of this guy who's just a vulture capitalist running the pandemic under Democrat Party of Science Representative Joe Biden. This article is from the American Prospect, and it's titled The Corporate Past of Jeffrey Zients. The administration's highest-ranking COVID official built his wealth through billing practices that have been alleged as fraud, triggering hundreds of millions in fines, by Daniel Boguslaw and Max Moran, or Boguslaw. This is from April 4, 2022, and it follows up on an earlier article, like I said, from the American Prospect, Fire Jeff Zients. So let's follow up on this, because I actually found the original story really interesting. And this was, I guess, produced in partnership with the Revolving Door Project. For people who don't know the term revolving door as regards government, it means basically that between corporate America and the government, there's just a revolving door where the large businesses and industries that are supposed to be regulated by the government are like, you'll be the CEO 1 year of the company, and then you'll be head of the government agency regulating said agency. So really, these companies are just running the regulatory agencies. It's called regulatory capture, but also the revolving door between government. And a lot of times they go back and forth. They'll be in the corporation, then the regulatory agency, then the corporation again, and so on. So, there's absolutely, no check or balance to the system at all, even within capitalism. It's just literally the same fucking people. Anyway, in the span of a single week in March, a two-part vanishing act disappeared America's COVID response plan and the man overseeing it. On March 17, COVID czar Jeffrey Zients announced that he would be replaced in a month's time by Brown School of Public Health Dean and Albright Stonebridge consultant Ashish Jha, who was set to take over a job without a working budget. According to the White House, let me just add, actually, Jha recently made a statement that the U.S. Medical system is going to be clogged up for years with people suffering with lingering COVID problems, and who can't get other non-COVID related surgeries that they need because of COVID, and just basically that the pandemic is going to keep gumming up the medical system for literally years to come. That will cost many people their lives. And he's the guy in charge. So this is what they're running with. All right. According to the White House, basic services like COVID testing, free antiviral drugs, and vaccine funding will all expire without immediate action from Congress to fund these efforts. A deal for $10 billion in funding, less than half of what the administration requested, is trudging through Congress. The hasty exit of Zients, the government's most senior pandemic coordinator, follows his attempt to downplay the health impacts of the disease, encourage the removal of mask mandates, and incentivize a return to the workplace. Remember, this is Biden's guy. As the COVID coordinator, his leadership and rhetoric read to many as more management consultant than public health expert, which indeed he is not. Zients defenders have regularly responded to this criticism by pointing out that he has invested in healthcare companies throughout his career. Shockingly bad defense, making the claim that this executive experience should qualify him as a health policymaker. Except he just bought the companies. He doesn't actually know anything about fucking science. But a prospect investigation into those very firms reveals a disturbing pattern that suggests exactly the opposite. Over the span of 2 decades, the healthcare companies that Zients controlled, invested in, and helped oversee were forced to pay tens of millions of dollars to settle allegations of Medicare and Medicaid fraud. They've also been accused of surprise billing practices and even medical malpractice. Taken together, an examination of the companies that made Zients rich paints a picture of a man who seized on medical providers as a way to capitalize on the suffering of sick Americans. In the end, it seems to have all paid off. The most egregious violation is documented in a 2015 Justice Department settlement announcement. Portfolio Logic, the investment firm Zients founded with his own money, agreed to pay almost $7 million to resolve allegations of fraudulent Medicare and Medicaid billing involving a subsidiary, the Pediatric Services of America Healthcare, or PSA, that it purchased in 2007. According to the DOJ, Department of Justice, PSA pocketed healthcare overpayments from the federal government instead of returning them, and even overstated the length of time they'd provided services covered by Medicare and Medicaid. PSA also asked for money from the Georgia Pediatric Program for a home nursing program without documenting any home nursing at all, according to the settlement. Edward J. Tarver, the U.S. attorney prosecuting the case, wrote, "The failure to report and return a known overpayment is a serious offense that ultimately drives up the cost of health care for all of us." Sheila McCrae, the whistleblower in the Portfolio Logic PSA case, said that when she tried to report the fraud, upper management told her to, quote, hold off to see whether the government caught the errors. McCrae said that she was then reprimanded with pay cuts and demotions before finally being fired. A second whistleblower, director of clinical nursing at PSA, Yvette Odomosu, also alleged wrongdoing, suggesting that the highest levels of the company were aware of the illegal business practices and ultimately encouraged this behavior. PSA wasn't the only company in Portfolio Logic's portfolio that ended up paying millions to settle insurance fraud. Amedisys, a major American home healthcare provider and currently the second largest hospice service provider in the country, settled a similar Medicare and Medicaid fraud suit 1 year earlier for $150 million, many times more than the PSA case. According to the DOJ, between 2008 and 2010, Amedisys allegedly billed Medicare for nursing and therapy services that were medically unnecessary or provided to patients who were not homebound, and otherwise misrepresented patients' conditions to increase its Medicare payments. These billing violations were the alleged result of management pressure on nurses and therapists to provide care based on the financial benefits to Amedisys rather than the needs of patients. Just a few years later, Zients was heading up President Obama's efforts to fix the hobbled Obamacare website rollout. With the fraud allegations still unsurfaced, Zients was lauded as a whiz kid, having single-handedly saved the rollout of Obama's singular policy achievement. In reality, Zients mainly just hired a team of actual experts and then bought them pie as they worked. Years earlier, firms he invested in were allegedly defrauding the same system. Out of dozens of profiles, write-ups, celebrations, and plaudits heaped on Zients' managerial brilliance, nowhere did the Beltway press note that his fortune was growing thanks to his companies grabbing at government healthcare money in an allegedly fraudulent manner. They also failed to ID his business partner, Eric Minkov, who, as managing director of Portfolio Logic, helped Zients oversee and acquire companies bleeding both citizens and the government's Medicare coffers dry. Allegedly. According to Minkov's LinkedIn profile, he began his career at the Corporate Executive Board, a management consultancy where Zients made the fortune he would use to fund Portfolio Logic. This was followed by a stint at McKinsey before reuniting with Zients. Minkov then went on to become CEO of a Portfolio Logic investment, Best Practices Inc., which is a medical outsourcing company that has been accused of both medical malpractice in the death of an infant and later, potentially illegal billing practices. According to an archived version of the company's now defunct website, Best Practices Inc. employs, quote, a process-centric approach to overlay business practices on clinical care. We use execution, that sentence is quite something. We use execution-oriented training programs to drive excellence in risk reduction, customer satisfaction, leadership, and billing. After managing Best Practices Inc., Minkov revolved into the federal government for a year-long stint at the OMB, Office of Management and Budget, and the GSA, General Services Administration, the gateway agencies to federal funding and private contracts. Zients had overseen OMB as its acting director 2 years earlier in 2010. In 2013, Minkov assumed the role of CEO at PSA, where he stayed until 2015, when the DOJ announced its settlement with the company. That year, Minkov became a partner at private equity fund TPG Growth. This role wasn't affiliated with Zients until Minkov helped sell TPG's portfolio firm, North Star Anesthesia, to the Cranemere Group, which Zients helped start after leaving the Obama administration. This is pretty telling about who actually runs the United States, isn't it? Not long after that sale, Minkov himself would depart TPG to rejoin Zients at Cranemere and assume the role of chairman at North Star. Before Cranemere acquired it, North Star had already been accused of gross medical malpractice and overt surprise billing, which involves presenting patients with high charges for unexpected out-of-network services. So for people who don't know of such things, insurance networks is when you have private insurance in the U.S., things are either in your network, like it's providers that your insurance covers, or they're out of network. They're outside of the practices and providers that your insurance is going to pay the most amount of coverage for. If you go to an out-of-network provider, you're going to get hit with many more charges. These trends continued under the new ownership. North Star boasts dismal reviews from the Better Business Bureau. In February, ProPublica reported the story of a man who donated his kidney to save his cousin's life. Living organ donors are never supposed to receive a bill for their act of bravery, and yet North Star Anesthesia billed Elliot Malin for $13,000 and threatened to send his bill to collections if he didn't pay. After being notified, North Star hurriedly tore up the bill and claimed it was just a mistake. Cranemere Holdings, which Zients left to take on his current role and where Minkov currently serves as managing director, has invested in multiple healthcare companies premised on maximizing profits from medical billing. One of those companies, Ramirez, I think, is, quote, a patient-focused RCM company with an innovative approach and a creative, fun team. RCM stands for Revenue Cycle Management, a euphemism for medical billing and its accompanying apparatus. Ariadis' CEO, Ashwini Kotwal, is the former CFO of North Star Anesthesia, it sounds familiar, and would have had direct knowledge of North Star's prior billing practices and their profit-generating potential. In addition to Ariadis, Cranemere is also heavily invested in 2 medical outsourcing companies, the kind that are notorious for stripping down services and maximizing revenue through billing practices. I'm having real flashbacks to Luna Oi's thread on what a fucking disaster, shockingly bad conditions are found in the United States shouldn't even get into the medical system. This is the kind of fucking hell on earth we're dealing with here in the United States. One company, Extant Healthcare, is engaged in outsourcing of surgeons and nurses. In January, a bipartisan coalition of lawmakers wrote to Zients to urge an investigation into price gouging by outsourcing nursing companies. That crackdown has failed to materialize. Outpatient Imaging Affiliates, OIA, another Cranemere company that constructs and oversees hospitals' imaging facilities, also oversees all revenue cycle management for them, giving it control over billing and the cost of service. According to an Axios report, OIA's flagship partner, UVA Health in Charlottesville, Virginia, has an F rating for surprise billing, having filed over 7,000 court actions against patients seeking millions in surprise billing fees. Of the 100 largest hospitals measured by revenue, UVA Health made it to the top 3 for worst surprise billing offender. Returning to the White House after Cranemere, Zients reported in his financial disclosures that his wealth had swelled to somewhere between $89.3 million and $442.8 million. Somewhere in there. Yeah, I might have 90 million. I also might have 442 million. I'm not really sure, so hard to keep track. No small part of that wealth was generated by companies hounding Americans to pay for medical treatment and making dubious billing to the federal government. As rumors swirl about Zients succeeding Ronald Klain as President Biden's chief of staff, his corporate record raises serious questions about his fitness to serve in an administration that has attempted to market itself as a champion of working people. I mean, if you bought that one, I'm not sure there's hope for you, to be honest. As Politico reported during the Biden administration, a CEO on Obama's Jobs Council remarked that he thought Zients, then a top Obama aide, was a Republican. Is there a difference anymore? And by the way, of course, there is hope for you. I do hope that if you bought into the Biden thing, you eventually do see through it and come on over to the actual left, which Biden has absolutely nothing to do with. So, I mean, is this the guy that you want in charge of the COVID response, not only because he lacks any integrity and is obviously just a total swindler, but this is a guy who's invested directly in a number of medical companies. I mean, they're not going to make more money off of you wearing a mask than they are off of you not wearing a mask and then getting sick and needing treatment in one of their facilities. Again, you know, we looked at this before where where is it? Oh, I put it up in the last stream. I don't know if I have it anymore. But the Goldman Sachs saying that curing patients may not be a sustainable business model. Well, that's pretty much the shape of things in the U.S. right up to the pandemic. Right up to Biden's White House making major decisions about the pandemic that are going to affect life and death and major quality of life issues for a great many people. All right, that ends the COVID section of our video. Let's get into the chat for a little bit again, and then I'm going to end talking about Russia with some anti-fascist research about Desovietization, decommunization in Russia. All right, so we came off of that comment about the German Minister of Health. I saw a headline where some Yankee veterans are now retiring in Vietnam now, 60 years after trying to eradicate the system they're now enjoying in retirement. Makes me sick, honestly. You're not alone. Oh boy. So I guess when Twitch was glitching up for me, it did the weird thing where it reposts a lot of comments. So I got 3 copies of some of the comments. All right, here are the actually new ones. I found them. Okay. Nope, and it keeps... I think I have another copy of it. About Red Fightback, I'll let you know, but probably not until more concrete details come out about the collapse of that organization. Basically, a white supremacist UK culture was reproduced within the party and a clique of CC members operating outside of the code of conduct. That is too bad. When people say anarchists and communists want the same thing, I always cringe. They're individualists when the goal is to get people to think collectively. Imagine being an anarchist official and trying to tell anarchists what to do. Fuck you, Dad. Yeah, so I mean, Stalin addresses this, I think, pretty well in Anarchism or Socialism. And basically, he goes through how there is there's a certain commonality in that both claim to want liberation, even of a somewhat similar type. But the anarchists seek liberation of the individual as the leading step. This cannot be the leading step. What Marxists seek is liberation of the individual through liberation of the class. Now that action is actually possible, so I recommend that text. We have a playlist on the channel, Marxists on anarchism or something to that effect, of Marxists back to Marx and Engels talking about anarchism and criticizing it, if you're interested in that. Oh, you DM'd me what happened vis-a-vis your union from where you teach. Yeah, so basically there was somebody asking for some of the COVID resources, and I sent them some stuff, as well as we put all the links to the COVID articles in the videos that we post. And they were giving a presentation to their union at a school to try to get some more action on COVID. So I haven't seen your DM yet. I guess, actually, let me take a look. Am I guessing that it didn't go well as well as you might have hoped? That is my guess from the way that you're presenting it in the chat here. Loading. All right, sent a photo. Let's see what I'm not going to put it on the screen, but so they shot you down. They don't want to go forward with a mask mandate in spaces where you can't socially distance, nor mandatory testing or anything else. The committee that was supposed to be a committee didn't even end up becoming a committee in the union because they saw no point in doing so. Well, your union is officially part of the problem. Unions are good, but they're good as a formation. If they're not actually taking appropriate action, then what's the fucking point? And again, this is the Democratic Party. I kind of feel like if there was a Republican in power, the Democrats would be pretending to oppose them. Although who knows, on pandemic policy. Who even knows? Somebody replies, same, I'm in an industrial print shop. The work is at the factory. If I had the money, I'd buy a mini web press and print propaganda at home. Yeah. I'm one of the few people at work who still wears a mask, and I'm forced to get inside cramped units with coworkers who don't call off when sick because they're afraid of getting written up. That is the reality. Yeah, also, so the thing about the stigma around long COVID, the stigma around wearing masks or even just caring about COVID is, you think that people are going to talk about their long COVID openly. Yeah, I don't know. Have you reached your deductible yet? U.S. health insurance proverb. So people who have a functioning healthcare system in your country, the insurance has a deductible, which is an amount that you have to be billed before the coverage kicks in. It's such a bad system. The historical failure of the Biden administration is doing nothing for COVID. It's astounding. Yeah, they are actively making it far worse, but they're not doing anything positive for sure. Somebody says they got the Novavax vaccine, had very few side effects. Yeah, again, if people are, vaccine hesitant, at least look at Novavax seriously. We put up a graphic in the last stream about how much higher the death rate is, and it's not just deaths; it's disease severity as well. Let me see if I have the thing. In unvaccinated people, your risk of severe outcomes are just so much worse. You really don't want to mess around with that. Is it up here? Yeah, deaths by vax status. So this is in people 50 and up per 100,000 people. But again, it's not just the deaths you have to worry about. It's how hard the virus is going to hit your system. So this is from that peak late July into August when BA4, BA5 were really kicking in. Again, just the outcomes far, far worse if you're not vaccinated. So keep that in mind. We're trying to help you. I found out the hard way that I was out of network. Ouch. Being sent to collections is just another way of having debtors' prisons. Yes, and the harassing phone calls have straight up sociopaths on the other end. Yeah. It really disappoints me to see so-called communists unironically supporting Russia both as a country and it's capitalist and its invasion of Ukraine rather than following Lenin's concept of revolutionary defeatism. Yeah, we would expect non-communists to have a variety of non-communist takes. Self-avowed communists, you got to do better. You really got to do better. So that's a decent segue into the final section of articles that I had here. I wanted to do a little bit. First of all, just generally speaking, as I mentioned before, I had posted this thread or this meme. Where did I put it? Strange. I really don't know where I put that. Well, anyway, a week or two ago, I posted a meme on the channel, which was showing what the war is now and what the war must become. And this is sort of a basic statement about Marxist principles. You can read Lenin's the principle of revolutionary defeatism as discussed and laid out very clearly, actually, in a document called The Defeat of One's Own Government in the Imperialist War. And also Alexandra Kollontai's Who Needs the War? Both of these, I believe, are from 1915. And it's very, very clear what the position is on inter-imperialist wars. Now, what is imperialism? Again, non-communists might not know this. Communists really should. Imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism. When capitalism is starting out, it's the Wild West. There are large capitalists. There are also a lot of small capitalists. Capital isn't that consolidated yet. Capitalists haven't bought out all the competition. But then by the early 20th century, capitalism was getting really, really consolidated. Monopolies were forming. And the home markets of the more advanced countries in Europe and the United States were starting to saturate their home markets, and they needed to start exporting their capitalism abroad. And in the process of doing that, they would have conflicts with each other over the right to exploit other countries and also just, settling accounts with each other in general about how to divide up the world and, divide up the spoils of the plundering that they were doing. So you get world wars in that scenario when you have different factions of advanced capitalists or imperialists fighting with each other about what's going to happen. That's shaping back up today because Russia has, the USSR was politically destroyed 30 years ago, and it was in real disarray for about 10 years, and then for about 20 years now, it's been more stable. And guess what? It's capitalist. I mean, they make no pretense to be anything else, but it's capitalist. And so they're engaging in the behavior that all advanced capitalist countries necessarily behave in. As communists, we understand this. If you are a communist and you don't understand this, you're not a very good communist. You need to keep studying. All right? So stop talking, study more, then you can come back and when we have some shared basis for this stuff. And, anyway, I have to say, overall, people who get it far outnumber those who don't. The ones who don't, though, can be very loud. And it's just irritating. It's good to see when I post a meme about what the war must become, imperialist war must become revolution. Now, that requires a lot of organizing. We're going to discuss that in a minute. That was the most popular post ever on the S4A community posts, and kind of by a lot, too. Most popular post ever. Still, reading the revisionist comments, it's still just like, what are you doing here exactly? It's really bizarre. People are like, Putin is a competent leader. That's not the point. He's a capitalist. And we don't sort of do lesser evil imperialism here. That's really not the point. In the defeat of one's own government, there's, specific things about not picking the lesser of two evils. And also in Kollontais' piece, Who Needs the War? Discussion of the same thing. It's like the basic gist of revolutionary defeatism is that when the capitalists go to war with each other, it creates a vulnerability in the capitalist order. They're arming soldiers to go shoot other soldiers who are working people from other countries. And that's a vulnerability to be arming the people you're exploiting. So they have to lay on the nationalistic, jingoistic rhetoric really thick in order to get people to do what? These people that they've now armed, not to shoot them. All right? So the idea is that imperialist war can be turned into revolution. And that's the basic gist of it. Revolutionary defeatism is to see the capitalists, really all capitalists, but especially the ones closest to you, get defeated and weakened to create a bigger opening for revolution. It's not you cheer on the lesser evil imperialist to defeat some greater evil imperialist so that they're sort of doing your work for you and then revolution magically happens. That's not really the scenario. So I'd like to sum up some of my thoughts. I had posted on Twitter, again, very popular post, the only side you should be rooting for in the Russia-Ukraine conflict is the side of the proletariat. But I followed up with a few more thoughts. I can't understand anyone in good faith cheering on Russia's murderous imperialist blunders right now as somehow weakening NATO. All NATO is doing is sending weapons to a non-NATO country, Ukraine, and getting Russia to deplete themselves at the expense of innocent lives and infrastructure. NATO is not losing anything directly right now, territory, people, or resources, except for the money that they choose to spend on the conflict, which Russia is taking most of the hits on. Ukraine is taking most of the hits on. Russia, on the other hand, is putting everything on the line for this effort, which is now in its 11th, soon to be 12th month. When any capitalist country goes to war, it's taking a risk and making itself vulnerable to the ire of its exploited classes. Right now, Russia is taking a much bigger risk than NATO in this particular way. NATO is putting very little directly on the line comparatively, compared to Russia. The bottom line right now is that anti-revisionist Marxist organizing isn't happening like it should be happening in any country. But if it were, a capitalist war creates an opening, a vulnerability, a weakness for that movement to exploit and attack. If anything, though, it's Russia, not NATO, that has the bigger vulnerability and therefore is more likely to fall in that way. For all those cheering on the Russia-Ukraine war as creating openings for Marxist-led revolution, again, currently, the requisite organizing isn't there. It should be, but And we need, as communists, it is our job and function above and beyond everything else to be doing that organizing. All right, so we got to get caught up on that. But as of the moment, it's not there. So what's the likely outcome? Catastrophe. And more likely in Russia than in the EU or the US. Why? Russia is the one actually fighting this war. It's near their turf, etc., etc. So there's so many wrong calculations all around, and it's kind of all I see when you go on a site like Twitter where this was posted. Also, for years prior to this invasion, the United States was announcing annually, hey everybody, Russia's about to invade Ukraine, Russia's about to invade the Ukraine. And every year the commentators would say, no, Russia's not stupid enough to fall for that provocation, which the USA obviously wants to happen. And yet, here we are. They did it. So apparently they are stupid enough to fall for that provocation. But again, for the people who are saying that, war weakens the capitalist power and creates an opening for revolution. If you're not focused on that happening probably first in Russia rather than the NATO countries, then I don't really know what you're doing. You're just parroting Russian imperialist propaganda by saying that. These are former USSR countries, which are in the process of decommunization, Desovietization. We're going to read about that extensively in just a few minutes. But this entire twisted sphere, it just doesn't hold up to communist thought in any way. It just does not hold together. Even if you're going to follow this kind of logic and, say that the war is, weakening countries. It's probably weakening Russia and Ukraine more than anyone else by far. Russia far more than the United States or some random NATO country. So there you go. This is not even to mention the participation of some of the. I'm not even going to get into that right now. But for the people who are in this sort of opportunistic, bourgeoisie aligning headspace, I want to address a few comments I see in the chat, and I'll get there in just a second. The multipolarity thing, the championing of the BRICS group. We're going to read a couple of articles on BRICS right now. They're often fans of people like Jeffrey Sachs, which is super ironic if you're trying to create some sort of a socialist narrative here, because Jeffrey Sachs was one of the people leading the charge on shock therapy in like Poland and Russia. So as far as, re-liberalizing the former USSR countries, Jeffrey Sachs is sort of like at the head of the list there. But again, if you're more aligned with Russian capitalist interests, then you would love somebody like Jeffrey Sachs, because he's who put you in power. He's who helped tear down the system that was in your way, the USSR. So let me address a couple of things in the chat. Mod, a comment disappeared that I wanted to address, and I didn't even necessarily disagree with. So use a lighter hand in doing this, because that was a perfectly fine comment. It was the one about war not creating an opening. All right, anyway. I have articles on the subject of Putin's competence I would love to criticize if I ever had the time to do a video. Yeah, people who are interested in Putin's actual rule, Paul Sturm just put out an article about the legacy of Putin. So if you follow them on Twitter, it's one of their most recent posts. We may read that at some point. Putin is super nationalist, always does sketch me out when I see MLs praising him. It's the height of opportunism. You're praising the person who is presiding over the destruction even of the legacy of the USSR. They're trying to erase and tarnish the memory of it, as we'll get to. The winner of the war will rebuild the war-torn country and exploit their resources. I love the comments about NATO wants a destroyed Ukraine and Russia. A united communist Ukraine and Russia would be stronger than them separately, and NATO fears that more. Yeah, I actually had somebody try to tell me on Twitter that communist revolution in both Ukraine and Russia was the U.S.'s agenda. Oh, that just helps the U.S. No, it absolutely does not. It would take both Ukraine and Russia off of the menu. They would no longer be for sale. What they're doing with decommunization and desovietization is preparing those countries for deeper integration with global capitalism. They have to erase the, quote, stain of their history as participants in the USSR, which gave a black eye to capitalism and slowed down capitalism for 70 years. So their punishment for that is they have to sit on the sidelines of NATO until they have, suffered enough and meet all the criteria. There are some partisan groups on the Russia-Ukraine battlefront, but it's very few and far between. This is a result of the decommunization policies that have been in power for 30 years. Do I think that NATO sending tanks to Ukraine will escalate the war? I mean, it'll certainly sustain the war. I don't know if specifically it'll escalate it, but it'll certainly help to sustain it. And there's always the risk of escalation the longer that it goes on. We also have to remember that the Communist Party of the Russian Federation has nothing to do with the CPSU. I mean, even the CPSU went revisionist. In a way, the CPRF is like the further degenerated, even more revisionist, mutation of the dying CPU in its end days, CPSU in its end days. And also, none other than neo-fascist Alexander Dugin wrote the KPRF's founding charter. Yeah, they're also homophobic, anti-Semitic. When a neo-fascist writes your platform and you're tolerated by the Putin government, what else are you going to expect? They've also platformed Nazbol ghouls and artists like Alexander Harchikov. I don't know that one specifically, but yeah. It's campism. I'm sick and tired of it. Yeah, absolutely. It's ironic that Democracy Now! I'm just going to put up the other screen here. I didn't realize I was coming back to the chat. We'll just put up the chat screen for a minute. It's ironic that Democracy Now! Consider themselves left-leaning and Jeff Sachs is a regular guest. Yeah, so the thing about Sachs, he had supported Bernie Sanders in the primary, and he ran for World Bank president in 2012. And he is leading the charge on, the peaceful multipolar coexistence thing. It's a complete idealist fiction that this is even a possible. Oh yeah, all the capitalists are just going to get along. And he's like, they can just use the UN Charter and they just make nice among themselves. Do you know what kind of evil the powers you're talking about have perpetrated in the past? Why do you think they're going to suddenly not start doing world wars and start behaving themselves when the economic system has not changed that they're all running on? Let's read a little bit about... actually, I don't even really want to bother so much with the Jeff Sachs right now. But yeah, he gives this sort of appearance of being this like nice, friendly SOCDEM. But remember, even the SOCDEMs are capable, and they're anti-communist, so they're capable of pushing for shock therapy, disaster capitalism, Naomi Klein would say, in places like Bolivia and Poland and Russia. So he hopes for a multipolar world operating according to a common standard, which he considers to be the UN Charter. When you see people touting Jeffrey Sachs, these people are usually pretty bad opportunists. And again, the Russian bourgeoisie, he helped to put them in power. So that. Let's talk about BRICS for a minute, because that comes up a lot. There's a comment about that. If fascists in Brazil, who I know personally, are championing BRICS, you know you're in bad company. It is tough because previously colonized countries, Brazil, India, the Jewish people in Israel who back the Zionist white supremacist agenda in Palestine, are backing capital full-throatedly, though not specifically U.S. global hegemony. And what they don't realize, it's all the same system. Capitalism is global. Russia owns U.S. Treasury holdings. Like, they all invest in each other. It's kind of a lot of this East versus West, unipolar, multipolar. It's a bit of a dog and pony show to keep people distracted. The problem is capitalism around the world, the capitalists of all countries. Yes, the U.S. is set up as kind of a stronghold of it, but it is global. The capitalist class of all countries, having particular ethnic qualities does not somehow pardon or allow their capitalism to be something other than what capitalism is elsewhere. We're talking about what Russia wants, what the U.S. wants, and what NATO wants. What about what Ukraine wants? Well, Ukraine was trying to join NATO, so that's why they often get lumped in with NATO. I think that is the most important thing here. Yeah, the thing is, Ukraine is a small country. It used to be part of the USSR. It was really granted independence pretty much as part of the founding of the USSR, the destruction of the old Russian Tsarist Empire. And it's not strong and consequential enough economically. It's caught between two much larger powers. And so that's been the history of Ukraine. The western and northern two-thirds of Ukraine tend to lean more towards Europe, and the eastern and southern third of Ukraine tends to lean more towards Russia culturally, politically, and otherwise. And that's kind of been the tug of war for the last 30 years. Now, the pro-Europe side has taken a very right-wing turn since 2014, and an ultra-nationalist turn. And in the context of decommunization, where you take socialism off the table, nationalism can only become fascism. And so same thing in Russia as well. When you take socialism completely off the table as an option, if you try to say, we are Ukrainians, this is our nation, etc., it's going to start taking on a fascist character because of the capitalism. And that's actually what has been happening. And that's been encouraged by the NATO alliance as well. So, I mean, it's a poisonous scenario that can only be ended by, I'm not going to bother with the meme, but it can only be ended by socialism again, which is the one thing that they're really not allowed to consider. So there you go. And as communists, we're not going to start advocating for capitalism in this context. It makes no sense. If we weren't advocating for capitalism over 100 years ago in World War I, why would we be advocating for it now when the class composition of all these societies is so much more proletarian? The peasantry is basically gone, etc. We're in an even more advanced stage of capitalism. Why would we suddenly back off of advocating for socialism? Russia will never be part of NATO if China... but this was something that was pursued around 2000 by Putin. And we're going to read in the Desovietization article how they have not properly desovietized enough. And it's part of their punishment that they have to be junior capitalists in the League of Global Capitalists for the time being. Yeah, I agree. An escalation would be less like sending tanks. That's more of just a sustaining of the war. Escalation would be more like a NATO country personally entering the war on the behalf of Ukraine or Russia. Ukraine specific, right. Zay Squirrel talks a lot about Jeffrey Sachs. That's unfortunate. And Danny Haifong. Of fucking course, Danny Haifong did a long interview with Jeffrey Sachs. The capitalist class has total solidarity with each other. So let's jump into this BRICS shit for a minute. BRICS is a capitalist trading group. There's nothing socialist about it, and let's just look into it. So where does it come from? And again, shout out to Comrade Shpakova for emphasizing this so much in her research. So this is from Goldman Sachs. With GS Research Report, BRICS are born. In 2001, again, this is like early in the Putin days, about 10 years after the destruction of the USSR, and after a decade of mafia rule in the USSR, or former USSR, the capitalism starts to stabilize a bit. And so Goldman Sachs creates a way for capital to flow into these areas more easily. Let's learn about BRICS and BRIC ETF. So with Goldman Sachs Research Report, BRICS are born. In 2001, Goldman Sachs Global Investment Research Division publishes the report, Build Better Global Economic BRICS, coining the acronym for the 4 countries that would reshape the world economy: Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Between 2000 and 2009, the pace of growth of emerging economies outpaced that of developed countries for the first time. A 2001 Goldman Sachs Economic Research Report focused on 4 rapidly growing emerging market countries, specifically as key drivers of future global economic growth: Brazil, Russia, India, and China. With Building Better Global Economic BRICS, a new term entered the investing vernacular. So the term itself came from Goldman Sachs. The paper, authored by Jim O'Neill, the head of global economic research, projected that over the coming 10 years, the weight of the BRICS, especially China, in world GDP would grow significantly, and thus so would the global economic impact of fiscal and monetary policy in these 4 countries. In line with these prospects, the paper argued that the G7 should be adjusted to incorporate BRIC representatives. Other BRICS-oriented research would follow from Goldman Sachs in the ensuing years, including 2003's paper, Dreaming with BRICS, The Path to 2050, which posited that the BRICS countries could overtake the largest Western economies by the year 2039. The BRIC moniker was adopted broadly. And let me just back up for a second. Let's say that they do that. Let's say that the BRIC countries overtake the largest Western economies by the year 2039. Will the global proletariat be, just by virtue of that, a step closer to ruling our own lives in society? No, it's just capitalism. All right? Class struggle is what gets you socialism, not multipolar capitalism. Class struggle. All right? So that's another thing with these people, with the Jeffrey Sachs and the BRICS and all these various forms of, the SOCDEM to neo-fascist spectrum pushing this shit. Do they talk about class and class struggle? Usually not. The BRIC moniker was adopted broadly in financial and economic circles as the original paper's projections were borne out. India's economy grew at an average pace of 6.89% per year from 2000 to 2009, and China's soared at a yearly average of 10.35%. By the middle of the decade, numerous BRICS-themed mutual funds, ETFs, and indexes were created to track this distinct group of emerging economies. The first annual BRICS summit took place in 2009 in Yekaterinburg, Russia, bringing together leaders of the BRIC countries to discuss policy issues and common challenges. The following year, the group voted to invite South Africa to join, cementing the acronym BRICS, with a capital S this time. In 2014, the BRICS Development Bank was established in an agreement signed during the 6th Annual BRICS Summit in Fortaleza, Brazil. Since renamed New Development Bank and headquartered in Shanghai, the institution's goal is to mobilize resources for infrastructure and sustainable development projects in BRICS and other emerging market and developing countries. What do they mean by market? Anybody? By shining a research spotlight on a select group of emerging economies poised to become the next global growth powerhouses. And when they say growth, these people, Goldman Sachs, they're professional investors. All right, they're talking about where they can stick their capital and get a return on investment. That's what they're interested in here. Goldman Sachs helped both investors and companies frame their thinking and decisions based on a shifting global economic power dynamic. Beyond that, the BRICS concept triggered cooperation and collaboration among policymakers in these diverse countries on issues ranging from agriculture, trade, and environmental policies to national security and international finance. This article was originally published as part of a series commemorating the 150th anniversary of Goldman Sachs' founding. So before we even go on to the next thing, detailing how the BRIC ETFs work, Goldman Sachs is enthusiastically laying out this entire transfer of capital into these countries to fuel their growth. Do you think they're interested in communism? Do you think that they are interested in bringing about some, global peace? This is the same Goldman Sachs that has been around since 1869, bear in mind, that in the Trump administration was more represented than in any other presidential administration, although already heavily represented in previous administrations. They're the ones guiding this whole fucking process. What do you think this has to do with class struggle? If it has anything to do with class struggle, which class do you think they're representing here? It's time for a lot of people to, who are very half-assed communists, to admit they've been fucking conned. Unless you suddenly think that Goldman Sachs is the force of the fucking social revolution. They're capitalists. Like, this is imperialism. I don't know how people are not seeing this. All right, let's talk about the BRIC ETF just to get a little bit of the technical side of this going. This is from Investopedia by Daniel Liberto, just from a couple months ago. Reviewed by Michael J. Boyle, fact-checked by Scarler Clarine. What is a BRIC ETF? A BRIC ETF is an exchange-traded fund that invests in stocks and listed securities associated with the countries of Brazil, Russia, India, and China, otherwise known as the BRIC nations, usually through local stock exchanges or with American and Global Depository Receipts, GDRs. These funds are passively managed, meaning that the investments they make mirror the holdings of a broad underlying index and are not at a portfolio manager's discretion. Key takeaways. 1. A BRIC ETF is an exchange-traded fund that invests in stocks and listed securities associated with Brazil, Russia, India, and China. 2. Portfolio allocation may vary from fund to fund, but all ETFs in the space should be passively invested, mirroring the holdings of a broad underlying index. 3. There were once many BRIC ETFs invested in all 4 countries. Then, as the idea of BRIC as a hot market set waned, options became more limited. BRIC ETFs may carry slightly higher expense ratios due to the higher costs of investing directly in these foreign stock markets. Understanding BRIC ETFs. The advance of ETFs has made it possible for average investors to invest relatively easily in overseas securities without encountering big fees, limited options, and red tape. So they kind of streamline that process by bundling it in a way that is directly intended to get, random petty bourgeois money, invested in these things. Otherwise, you'd sort of need an attorney to navigate the whole process. They've deliberately mainstreamed that overseas investment process with these ETFs. These popular funds, which are listed on exchanges and traded throughout the day just like ordinary stock, offer the possibility to mimic the performance of the broader equity market or a specific sector or trend by mirroring the holdings of a designated index, a hypothetical portfolio of securities representing a particular market or a segment of it. BRIC ETFs are designed to give holders diversified exposure to Brazil, Russia, India, and China, 4 of the biggest emerging market economies. Assets are invested in both locally issued stocks and shares that trade on exchanges in the United States and Europe. The portfolio allocation among the 4 countries may vary from fund to fund, but all ETFs in the space, I just have to say, 3 people worked on this article. Nobody caught that countries is written as counties. Interesting. Anyway, continuing. But all ETFs in the space should be passively invested around an underlying index, such as the MSCI BRIC Index, whose 879 constituents cover approximately 85% of the free float adjusted market capitalization in each country. A fund can qualify as a BRIC ETF even if it is not invested in all of the 4 countries that make up the acronym. At one point in time, there were many BRIC ETFs invested in all 4 nations. Then, as the idea of BRIC as a hot market set waned, which the sort of war that Russia's doing is not really helping that. It's amazing. It's like you guys want to integrate with the global capitalist market, and then can you even help yourselves? But anyway, as the idea of BRIC as a hot market set waned, these funds disappeared. Currently, there are only 2 BRIC ETFs invested in securities in every one of the BRIC countries. Important, the concept of BRIC as a singular entity has gradually faded from popular thought over the years as the economic performances of these 4 nations diverged. BRIC ETFs may carry slightly higher expense ratios than funds focused on the US and Europe due to the higher costs of investing directly in these foreign stock markets. History of BRIC ETFs. BRICS shot to fame in 2001 when Jim O'Neill of Goldman Sachs collectively labeled them as the fastest growing market economies. Suddenly, the 4 countries were regularly talked about in union, despite diverging in nature and belonging to different parts of the world. Combined, they became the talk of Wall Street and the principal destination for any investor seeking out the higher returns offered by emerging markets. So why the higher returns? Maybe things like lower labor costs, a more exploitable population, etc. Maybe fewer regulations, things like that. Fast fact, by 2014, BRIC countries accounted for nearly 30% of global domestic product, up from 11% in 1990. So that is a lot of growth. Traders and investors wanted to invest in BRIC local securities, and companies and entrepreneurs were keen to bring their companies to BRIC countries to capture large markets with increasing amounts of capital and increased exposure to the consumption habits of developed nations. BRIC countries became especially hot investment targets after the Great Recession of the late 2000s, as their economies were still on the rise. But because of relative economies, individual securities and ETFs were still affordable to investors. From there, their popularity began to unravel. As the American economy recovered and BRIC economies leveled off, and the startling growth of the 2000s slowed down, that's one way to say that there was a global financial meltdown. BRIC countries individually were seen more realistically, and the concept of BRIC as a singular entity faded from popular thought. Though again, that does not stop the multipolar propagandists from still pumping this out at every opportunity that they get. It's so weird, it's so fringe. Anyway, criticism of BRIC ETFs. The term BRIC has regularly been dismissed as a marketing tool. Skeptics never took to the idea of viewing the 4 separate countries as one, and criticized asset managers for using the hype that Goldman Sachs' paper, Building Better Economic BRICS, built to piece them together as an economic solution, or as an investment solution, and the best gateway to emerging markets. Nowadays, it's common for the acronym to be described as senseless. Let's read that again. Nowadays, it is common for the acronym to be described as senseless. But again, that doesn't stop these people who are just straining their wishful thinking opportunism muscles like crazy to try to get you to see something that just isn't there, and to the extent that it ever was, it was being pushed by Goldman Sachs. Back in 2001, the 4 countries shared some similarities. Now their fates have diverged considerably. Since the concept was first formed, India and China have outperformed, while the other nations have underwhelmed. Got to take a sip here. Throat getting dry. That's better. Some critics have also pointed out that excessive marketing campaigns centered on the bumper returns offered by investing in all 4 of the BRIC nations failed to mention the issues of state intervention. Aside from India, investing in these countries generally meant buying stocks in companies more concerned with serving local interests than their shareholders. Can't have that. Benefits of a BRIC ETF. That's not to say that there's nothing positive to come from investing in all 4 of the so-called BRICS. Investors seeking emerging market exposure are always warned of the more volatile nature of these bourses and advised accordingly to spread their bets and diversify as much as possible. Investing in 4 different countries certainly fits that criteria more than just betting on one of them. ETFs also generally represent the best way to get exposure to these parts of the world. They can be bought and sold instantly on an exchange, making them more liquid than mutual funds, offer plenty of diversification in markets fraught with risk and unknown to the average investor, and work out a lot cheaper than investing directly in local stock exchanges. So this whole idea of people sort of souring on BRICS, let's read one more thing right here. Here's an article from 2017, specifically May. BRICS Bank is offering more of the same rather than breaking the mold. So this directly gets to the multipolar line that's being pushed about, oh, they're an alternative to the IMF and stuff like that. Are they, though? Because, again, capitalism is capitalism. If you want an actual change, support socialism. But, oh no, that's a really difficult course. You got to talk about class struggle and revolution and all that stuff that's not respectable to talk about. And it doesn't get you as many clicks, and it doesn't get you as much right-wing money, or none. The only right-wing money you're going to get is right-wing money trying to derail you. So the grifter opportunist podcaster complex is not necessarily looking quite so critically at this. They want to push hype, just like any other fucking investment scheme when you think about it. They push hype to get your buy-in. Is there anything actually behind it? Who cares? They made the sale, is their thought. I think of Jackoff Hinkle selling the fucking hedge fund. But again, that's an egregious example. You'll even find people who disagree with him, such as Danny Haifong, pushing this hype as well. But if you're a communist, you're concerned with class struggle, not with getting rich, not with becoming a billionaire, not with owning a hedge fund, but socialism. Let this hype just blow over you like the hot air that it is, and move on. Stay the course. All right, let's read the article. The New Development Bank recently held, so that's that NDB that we were talking about in Shanghai. The New Development Bank recently held its second annual meeting in the Indian capital of New Delhi to discuss the sustainability of financing development projects in its member states. The multilateral bank was established by the BRICS states of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. With headquarters in Shanghai, China, it was created to support emerging economies and provide an alternative to the domination of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. So these are major, European and U.S.-centered funds that are famous for their debt traps. So they lend money to countries at high interest rates. Paying back the loan is the most important thing. And some of the strings attached to the loans that they put out are things like if it looks like you're not going to be able to make your loan payments, you must let your people starve. You must do austerity. You can't not pay the loan. The loan has to be the first priority, and letting your country fall apart, hey, that's just the price of doing business with us. So these are the debt traps that they're famous for. Okay, so is this actually an alternative to that? But the new bank is already proving to be a replication of the Bretton Woods institutions. This can be seen through the partnerships the new bank is forming, as well as its operating posture. It's also showing bias toward the development of Asian countries. This is evident from its funding patterns and the recent proposed enlargement of the BRICS bloc. The list of proposed additions include Pakistan, Bangladesh, Iran, Nigeria, South Korea, Mexico, Turkey, Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam. All except 3 are Asian. The proposed expansion of the BRICS countries has been justified as a move to strengthen the bloc and fill the void created by rising protectionism in the U.S. Remember, this was early in Trump's days. Continuing. This article was written at that time. But it has been met with mixed reactions even among member countries. India, for example, has expressed its disapproval that BRICS Plus is China's ploy to cut New Delhi's influence in the group by roping in more pro-China countries. The New Development Bank's business as usual, because that's what capitalism is, and its bias towards Asia suggests that it will not become an alternative source of finance. It will not address the key areas of need for emerging economies like human capital development, poverty alleviation, and basic health care. More of the same. The New Development Bank was set up as an alternative to the World Bank and IMF, which are viewed to be pushing Western agendas. Again, let's pause there. Western. I mean, yeah, it refers to a specific geographical region. As communists, we're not interested in the geography as much as we are the capitalism. So, yeah. Capitalist agenda happens to be coming, out of the established, entrenched capitalist imperialist countries, but capitalism is the relevant factor here. It was to provide a development model that would be sensitive and beneficial to emerging economies. But it's quickly abandoning this mandate and falling into the trap of operating just like the institutions it was created to replace. Hey, almost like capitalism is a system which is independent of ethnicity, geography, etc. In September 2016, the New Development Bank signed partnership deals with the World Bank to co-finance projects. The agreement also aims to facilitate knowledge and staff exchanges. This puts the bank in bed with the institutions it was established to counter. The bank has also signed memorandums of understanding with the European Investment Bank, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and the Eurasian Development Bank, and the International Investment Bank, IIB. The agreements cover co-financing of infrastructure projects, the bulk of which are in Asia. Perhaps the foundations of the bank were faulty from the start. Its original designers were two former World Bank chief economists, Joe Stiglitz and Nick Stern. Given this history, it's possibly, and by the way, speaking of Western influence, Joe Stiglitz and Nick Stern, are these Asian names or where are they from? Anyway, seriously. You're trying to get away from Europe and the U.S. I don't think you succeeded there. Given this history, it's possibly never going to challenge the world financial order. Yeah, almost like more capitalism isn't threatening to more capitalism, except that there may be hiccups and bumps in the road as they squabble over the right to exploit and who gets what cut. Today, the New Development Bank is pushing the corporate-led development model, just like the World Bank, the IMF, and other Bretton Woods institutions. Their investments are profit-oriented, which tends to undermine social justice, you think? Thus, similar to the World Bank and IMF, the New Development Bank seems more focused on protecting its investments at the expense of saving the interests of the BRICS citizens. Just like what capitalism does literally everywhere because it's an impersonal system. Over the past decade, the corporate-led model has impoverished many people in emerging economies, particularly in Asia. It has led to farmer suicides. And again, the corporate-led model, they don't want to say capitalism, but that's what it is. It has led to farmer suicides, large-scale privatization, natural resource looting, and environmental degradation. Links there if you want to look at the article. Last page. Funding so far. The New Development Bank has so far made loans of $800 and $1 million. What did I just say? $811 million, I told you, Saturday, to entities in 4 BRICS countries towards energy infrastructure. Of this, $300 million went to Brazil, $81 million to China, $250 million to India, and $180 million to South Africa. For South Africa, the bank has so far not provided any meaningful opportunity to obtain additional finance. The loan of $180 million, or $2.6 billion in their money, was given to South Africa's power utility Eskom to develop 670 megawatts of power generation and 500 megawatts worth of renewable energy projects, including independent power producers. This unnecessary loan to an inefficient state-owned entity has only contributed to BRICS' power over South Africa by adding on to the current contingent liabilities, dollar-based loans that the government has guaranteed for the next 12 to 20 years. Weaknesses. There are weaknesses in the way in which the New Development Bank works that also raises questions about its intent. They mention here secrecy, no clear official records to the public about decisions, activities, and operational guidelines, so analysts have to rely on secondary and tertiary information sources. The second, they have yet to present any socioeconomic redress and environmental operating guidelines for communities. This would ensure that its funding does not lead to displacement, evictions, ecological destruction, loss of livelihoods, and threat to the basic right of life. These issues have recurred for decades due to projects funded by other multilateral development banks, because that's capitalism. So they're just basically saying, like, hey, look, we got a few communists in name in the mix. Trust us, bro. Capitalism will be different this time. No, it won't. Lastly, as a co-financier with developmental institutions like the World Bank, the bank's seriousness about promoting transparency, accountability, and probity remains questionable. To strengthen its relevance to emerging economies, the new development bank must review the much criticized, inequitable representation of developing countries, especially from Africa. It must also focus on where I just lost my place. It must also focus on small-scale investments rather than large-scale infrastructure projects. But are they as profitable? These often lead to, because again, that's what capital wants, profits, return on investment, ROI. These often lead to exclusion of people and communities and aggravate existing vulnerabilities rather than bringing about development. So there you go. The decommunization article is going to have to wait, but we'll pick up with that the next time that we stream in a few days, which might actually be Tuesday, definitely Wednesday if not. We're going to thank the patrons, but I am going back into the chat. I'm just going to put the patrons' names up on the screen, plus I believe a Jeff at $2 who I didn't have time to add their name yet. But while that's up there, let's just go through the comments and we'll wrap up for today. That other article would probably take us another hour. I just don't have time for that today. Alrighty. Around the early 2000s, so early in his rule, Putin tried to be buddy with George W. Bush, trying to get NATO membership. Yes, that's documented. It's a little sketchy, but it is documented. Trying to get NATO membership. Some people think that if everyone becomes neoliberal, it will somehow work together, even though military-industrial complex always needs some enemy to work. Yeah, remember, that is the U.S. economy pretty much, is the military and all that stuff. I mean, they do build tons of equipment that they don't use, like all those fighter jets that are out in the desert just falling apart slowly over time, collecting dust. So yeah, I'm going to take another sip here. So yeah, I mean, for us in the cheap seats, thank you patrons, by the way. I'm going to go back to the other screen now. For us in the cheap seats, they do East versus West. They do nationalism, internationalism for themselves as a class. The capitalist class is internationalist in that way. And nationalism for us. Keep us divided, keep us distracted, keep us killing each other instead of doing revolution. The Russo-Ukrainian war is an inter-imperialist war. I think that Prolokult's video for peace on the imperialist war in Ukraine is a must-watch on YouTube. Yes, I have seen that, and thank you for boosting Prolokult, or Prolokult, Prolekkult. Definitely, I recommend that. Have recommended it in the past and have seen it, yes. Is modern global war sort of a type of political theater? Yeah, I mean, that's basically what we were just getting at. Russia is not stupid in doing war. As much as Germany was the bad guy in World War II, they are now considered the global north and are backed by empire. War is a racket. In other words, it makes money. To what degree does Russia's escalation into war just legitimize them as a capitalist state? Health Revolt, my friend, you have just hit the nail on the head. Let me read that again. Is modern global war sort of a type of political theater? Russia is not stupid in doing war. In fact, what I was reading about Putin was they actually did want to invade Ukraine sooner, closer to 2014. They waited because Trump was in office. And again, these are, second, third, 12th hand reports. But apparently Putin wanted to wait until Trump was out of office because Trump was so stupid, in his opinion, that it was unpredictable what was he couldn't develop a clear understanding with Trump, in other words. So he wanted to wait until a more predictable representative of the U.S. empire was in power, just so he, kind of could know what he was getting. Anyway, Russia is not stupid in doing war. As much as Germany was the bad guy in World War II, they're now considered the global north and are backed by empire. War is a racket. To what degree does Russia's escalation into war just legitimize them as a capitalist state? this concept of Russia's legitimacy as a capitalist state and this war playing a role in that, that's what this is, I think, largely about. Also, war serves other roles in capitalism, flat out destroying capital so that it needs to be rebuilt again, so that capitalism can continue its life cycle without getting overthrown. That's that. So to tease this for next time, and I apologize because I really wanted to get into this today. You can just only do so much in a stream, though. Who is behind the decommunization of Russia? So this describes the process which has been ongoing since 1991, the fight against Soviet culture, history, and the Soviet heritage in general. So it says the need for desovietization was explained by the initiative group from the council under the president of the Russian Federation, that would be Putin, as an ideological measure before the necessary ultra-liberal reforms in the economy and society. So it was necessary to thoroughly desovietize before they could do all the libertarian, they say ultra-liberal, this is translated from Russian, ultra-liberal in the sense of capitalist. So all the liberal, free marketeer, libertarian stuff that is involved in decommunization and the destruction of, like any remnants of that legacy is necessary before they could really integrate with global capital fully. So basically what this article is about is the government of Russia is trying not to, they have to play to USSR nostalgia without actually being, well, they are anti-communist, yet they have to play to USSR nostalgia. It's a fine line to walk because most of the population is nostalgic about it because things are not great in Russia since capitalism has been reintroduced. They're a bit more stable now than they were in the 90s, but that's not saying much. Anyway, the Russian government has given a lot of this job to various NGOs. And then if you break down who is these NGOs, it's neo-Nazis, it's extreme reactionaries, etc. So as much as that's going on in Ukraine, and it is, it's going on in Russia as well. Because, again, the motive force of history is class struggle. The class question in the former USSR is how do we get rid of all the memory of the USSR, and whatever memory we can't get rid of, how do we at least tarnish it? How do we at least tarnish it to the point where when that nostalgia comes up, people can say, oh no, they were responsible for World War II. We can never go back to that. So they're trying to put a brick wall between them and the proletarian-led past of the USSR. So that's decommunization, etc. By the way, for all the anarchists out there and all the left comms and the Russia wasn't socialist in any way, etc. They wouldn't be having to decommunize this hard if Russia was never socialist, etc. If it didn't have any of that kind of history. So this article goes into detail about how this is the stain on the Russian bourgeoisie, which is now striving for that legitimacy. They're trying to prove their legitimacy, their bona fides, to the rest of the global capitalist class, and they got work to do because hey, they allowed that USSR to exist for a long time. So I'm very eager to get into this. I almost started recording it offline. We'll do this in a few days and we'll pick up. But let's continue. I'm not pro-Russia in any way, but all right, well, we'll see. I think a long war or Russia losing the war, more specifically Crimea, could lead to Russia losing some of its ability to police all of the states around them that fell into chaos and civil war after the fall of the USSR. Is that what you meant when you were talking about the war maybe leading to revolution? Yes. Yeah, anytime that the bourgeoisie... let's put it this way. Does it reflect stability, order, and predictability in a capitalist country when that capitalist country must go to war to hang on to its rule? Obviously, instability, disorder, they're barely clinging at that point. So the fact that a war breaks out is a massive crisis potentially of legitimacy. War is not popular, okay? War is hell. Anybody who's experienced it will tell you that if they live to tell the tale. The U.S. has been running many wars for 20 years now under the Global War on Terror rubric, and they've largely been hiding these wars from the public. I mean, it was in around 1970 when the Vietnam War was put on TV. That's where it was like a lot of the support for it was lost, because suddenly people were actually looking at the war and what the country was doing is like, hey, this is fucking terrible. And then only the sort of diehard reactionaries still supported it, while a much larger protest movement formed. And yeah, I mean, the anti-Vietnam War protest movement started out just as communist. I mean, just started out with the far left. It went more mainstream into more left liberal territory much later, you know? So it's always been communists who oppose this stuff in the first place. So credit where due. That's also why we need to resurrect the communism. But yes, it's a major point of vulnerability for capitalists when they have to go to war. Again, you're literally arming the class you're exploiting in that process. And also, they have to lean much heavier on the nationalistic propaganda to get people to go kill other people. People don't like killing other people. We're not really built for that. That's why people get PTSD so easily after being in like combat environments. Our psychology is not made for those sort of experiences. And probably our neurology as well, that our psychology partly comes out of. So yeah, this is a hard thing to get people to do, actually, or to keep doing for any period of time. It's a huge risk that they have to take. And so, the communist position being turned the imperialist war into revolution. I mean, it's a risk that they take every time. So, yeah. I mean, in the process of fighting the war, those countries might go super fascist. I mean, Ukraine is working up to that now, Russia as well. They're at different stages and they have different conditions. They have different circumstances in that, so the outcome is slightly different. But it's a similar process. Contradictions do emerge among capitalists. Yeah, I mean, that's the whole point. When I say they have quarrels over how to divide up the spoils, that's that. And there are other things too about there's suppliers, vendors and receivers and buyers and things that they don't always agree on the terms. I'd argue that what is called politics in this age is mainly a conflict between international financial capital and fixed national capital, though this isn't always clear and overwhelmingly they agree on things. That's a very broad and general statement. I think that's more the case sometimes and less the case other times. Okay, another comment. I mean, look at capitalists here in my country. They're anti-American nationalists. They'll hate and dunk on America for all the horrible things they've done to our country, but they will have zero remorse about destroying natural habitats, lakes, and beaches to build their stupid Tren Maya to bring self-entitled drug-loving tourists. Don't even get me started on the ethnic displacements and village destruction. So yeah, I guess it's okay when they destroy, their own country. So, but the U.S. they're super bad for doing it. But yeah, it'll be more profitable for them to build it themselves, so that's okay. Yeah, it now is named BRICS, all capitals, and the S stands for South Africa. Originally it wasn't. Originally it wasn't. Seems like the U.S. is friends with Russia economically. Both capitalists want to profit from oil and global warming. Both have a military-industrial complex. These are just hallmarks of imperialism, an advanced capitalist entity. I feel like war between capitalist empires is not so much a war between empires, but a class war on the working class. Even when they waste resources, they make money. So both are true. We're probably moving out of a stage where there are even the disputes among the capitalists and more into an age where the war literally is done to, just destroy working class movements. An establishment of a socialist state in Ukraine and Russia would have to involve a class-conscious working class led by an actual communist party. Yes, and can I say, as a communist, I'm here for all of it. We're here to support, encourage it in any way that we can. And you as a communist should be doing the same thing. Rising up against the capitalist states and seizing control of the means of production, the state would then have to be transformed into a socialist state, or replaced with a socialist state, whatever, where the means of production are owned and controlled collectively by the workers and society organized to meet the needs of all peoples rather than the profits of a small ruling class. You've got it, yes. Multipolarity in capitalism is just another way of saying inter-imperialist competition. Yes. Of course, BRICS isn't ushering in a global workers' revolt. There's not a communist party in control of any of those countries. I mean, arguably, the Communist Party of China is in control of China. To what extent they are not revisionist and actually communist, and also to what and for how long they stay in power. When you let foreign capital into your country, it's a matter of time. It's a matter of time. The capital invests in things to make more money. So that's what capital does over time. It grows. So you let the capital in, even if you're controlling it today, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. At what point can you not control it anymore? So this is very, very, very sketchy grounds when it comes to sticking to anything resembling Marxism. Which is to say, a correct understanding of the dynamics of capitalism. So, I feel so bad for some people I really respect falling for the East-West multipolarity campus scam. If I believe them to be in good faith, what sources should I send them besides this stream? Talk to them. I don't know. Talk to them. There's not a ton of people going out on this. Most people who have any outlet of any size are already on the bandwagon of multipolarity and opportunism. Breakthrough News does this too. I hate to say, but they pull some of this shit too. Danny Haifong, like all of this stuff. Yes, I mean, if you've heard of them, they're probably saying this line. I know Polit-Sturm doesn't. I know a few other actual communists don't. And I'm hoping that we who don't, Marxist Paul doesn't, Prolocult doesn't, Polit-Sturm doesn't, etc. Now, hoping something can come out of that in the coming years, for an anti-revisionist presentation of this, what are revolutionary working class politics in this situation? How do we actually end this? Or Lenin's imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. And Marxist Paul has a good video on, is Russia imperialist? Yes, absolutely. I believe Protocol has another one. They're both like 20 minutes long. So yeah. Just look how well multipolarism worked for the European monarchies in 1914. Absolutely. World War I. Yeah, communism is one red flag. Exactly. Yeah, in other words, there's substance to it. You can't merely call yourself communist. There may be political advantage in some places, such as China, to giving the appearance of continuity, of we're still building socialism, even though that may not actually be the goal. When the goals are laid out just in terms of GDP and other kind of capitalism biased ways, and you're actually undoing communes and certain kinds of land privatization and things like that. Oh, hey Muro, or Muro, I don't know how you pronounce that out loud. Modern war as theater makes even more sense when you think of how there is no draft conscription anymore and it's all volunteer. The general public is disconnected from how war functions. This was a big thing the libertarians pushed. It's a major part of the neoliberal age that we live in now, since the 1970s. They didn't want any more draft because the draft caused social disruption. The draft is also, yes, it's true that rich people could get out of the draft more easily. Look at Trump, for example, bone spurs, etc. But the draft is, in a way, more egalitarian because there's no specific. It's not like, oh, if your family is rich, you can get out in the law. It was, cross class, you would have to go do this. The reality was that the rich could get out of fighting it, of course, but not always. And, there was a tradition of sort of military involvement. But that's the thing. As the U.S. Shifted to fighting wars that were purely, they were able to sell World War II on like ending Nazism and all that kind of stuff. Notice when they did the Gulf War, they had to like make Saddam Hussein out to be literally Hitler. Like everybody has to be literally Hitler because that's what you can sell to Americans. Or you do 9/11 and then say like, they killed 3,000 of our people. Let's go kill 1 million of theirs, and even though they had nothing to do with it whatsoever, and so on and so on. And even though there's a pandemic now that's killing that many people a day or a week, depending on what part of the pandemic you're in. Yeah. But they really didn't want a draft because it stirs up everybody in the country. What they do instead is the economic draft. And it's actually true that the military is more representative of the middle class, like better off people, than the absolute poorest. That may be due to intergenerational military stuff. I mean, they do give them some like retirement packages and things. That people might have been able to set themselves up on a little bit. But we did a thing about that, demographics of the U.S. military. It's actually slightly better off people. It's not just the like most absolutely dirt poor people, though they absolutely do, prey on the poorest people too. But yeah, the public being disconnected from the war is huge. The libertarians pushed for moving away from that, and that was something that happened after the Vietnam War for exactly that reason. Capitalism destroys produced. There's a grammar issue in there. I'm not sure how to correct. I'm not sure how to read it. Capitalism destroys an infrastructure of production which requires rebuilding. Yeah, the wars destroy capital, I think is what you're trying to say. But don't forget nature, worker, people, and the land and its resources, which are the source of the value in the world, which are destroyed by the war as well. They make war in a completely blindsided way. War is never in our interest, and workers need world peace now more than ever, especially a lot of the weapons they're using, like depleted uranium, which spreads radioactive dust over things for millions of years. This is connected to every other issue, including climate change. Yeah, absolutely. Capitalist crisis is a chance for socialist revolution always. But that's the thing. That's the thing that I was saying before about Russia more than NATO is putting things on the line at this point. They're taking that bigger risk. If you think that the Russia-Ukraine war is an opening for revolution anywhere, I would really look at the NATO countries. Look at the countries actually involved in the war. Problem is, they're deeply entrenched in that desovietization, decommunization process, where the road to socialist organizing has been cut off. Now, you have a heavily revisionist KPRF claiming to be the communists of Russia. And they're not going to take you to communism, it doesn't look like. So you have to look to the underground anti-revisionist groups, but they're much, much smaller. We would like to see them grow. We would like to see an actual anti-revisionist, seriously Marxist movement grow, because that's how if you want to escape all the horrors that the 21st century is currently offering, today the pandemic, tomorrow climate change, beyond that World War III, World War IV, possibly just being fought literally to keep workers bewildered and to keep rebuilding capital over and over again. If you want to escape those horrors without end, socialism is the way out. But again, communism is not one red flag. You have to evaluate the content of alleged communists' program, because the capitalists have shown they're not above pretending to be communists. Look at what's been going on with the PATSOCs. Fascism generally is like a decoy socialism put out to mimic the appearance of socialism but have the content of capitalism. So this is part of why we do the education that we do here, is to get people to be able to actually recognize capitalism versus socialism when we see it. Have not read any Althusser yet, no. It's kind of a low priority, honestly. Same in Brazil as with Mexico. Bolsonaro and his supporters are all like, hand off the Amazon to Europe, but then creates an environment of open season, on indigenous land protectors, literally killing natives for profits in the local animal agriculture. Cattle ranchers are burning the Amazon and lynching natives. It's dire, but mum's the word amongst the Brazilian right wing. His supporters wanted to destroy the Amazon themselves. So it's like, how the nationalism is kind of skin deep. It's sort of like Democrats, quote, anti-fascism. It's skin deep. It's superficial. They're anti-fascism in name only. In reality, they're fascist collaborators. It's kind of a con game. Bullet's term is a great organization. They're looking for people to join the club to grow the organization too. Again, I like most of the material that I've seen from them, so it's good to see people doing good work. It's funny seeing, quote, communists who agree that inter-imperialist wars exist talk about how multipolarity is a good thing. Yeah, as if it didn't just lead directly to the wars. Now, I guess we're wrapping up here, but to address a comment that was made before about how wars are not an opportunity. They're not an opportunity that we're seeking out. I want to make that really clear. Wars are things that capitalists do all on their own. They control the resources, they control the militaries, they control the governments. It's their decision to go to war. That's not something we ever want. And so that's why we organize. We organize to slow down capitalism and to be an effective counterpower to the capitalists while capitalism exists, and then at the first opportunity to take all of their power away entirely, and then we become the dominant power. And we begin to suppress them on the way to eradicating capitalists as a class. Not as individuals, but I mean, make illegal all the activities that constitute capitalism, suppress them as a class, so that those people exist, but they're no longer capitalists. That's the idea. Creating a classless society where everyone, in other words, has the same relationship to the means of production. Capitalism begins the process of proletarianization, making people into proletarians who are propertyless. It begins it, but the capitalists don't proletarianize themselves. It's up to us to do that. But that's the idea of socialism. In creating a classless society, we can finish off that proletarianization. When everyone has the same relationship to the means of production, there are effectively no longer classes. At that point, even proletarian is there's sort of a new reality that emerges at that point. But yeah, so the war is not something that we seek out. That's something that the capitalists do, which is another thing that the people cheering on Russia are getting wrong. Any communist is trying to stop capitalist war. What we try to do is, if it breaks out and we can't stop it, which we can't because the organizing is for shit today, and, we have to live with time as a reality. Time caught up, the capitalists launched a war, we were not organized enough to stop it. Okay, well, we at least need to organize to slow it down as much as we can, and also try to just turn it to our advantage as much as possible. As communists, we're always trying to turn any situation, whether it's peace or whether it's war, to our advantage in our class interest, the class of the proletariat. We try to turn things to the interests of the proletariat as a class, whether it's peace, whether it's war. We don't want war, but it is an opportunity, when the proletarians are armed, when bullets are already flying, you can take advantage of that opportunity as well, as has been done in previous revolutions. Look at after World War II, how many socialist revolutions there were. There was one after World War I, and the creation of the USSR then. There were near misses in Italy and Germany after World War I, but no revolution, no successful revolutions there. But then after World War II, a much more extensive wave of revolutions. But then things stagnated in the second half of the 20th century. I look forward to your stream or video on the article on desovietizing Russia. Yeah, it's crucial and will provide a lot of insight into what we're talking about here. Straight fire I feel today in this chat, not a conversation like this happening anywhere in the world right now. Goosebumps. Well, you know, I mean, hopefully there are and we just don't know about it. But the bottom line is there is not enough anti-revisionist Marxist organizing going on, and we're doing this in an effort to increase the desire and interest for that. Wasn't World War II a sort of crisis of multipolarity? I'd say there were two main points to World War II. Yes, there were two different capitalist camps. There was the sort of Anglo-French, like, you know, the Allies, and there was the Axis. So yeah, you had capitalists who weren't playing nice with each other. Italy and Germany especially were looking for a slice of the pie, and the more entrenched, you know, but British weren't so big on that. They were like, no, we're, you know, queen of the roost here. Like, you know, we're doing this thing, and you sit at the kids' table. And Germany was like, no. So yeah, there was, and of course Japan as well, operating in the Asian sphere. But so yeah, I mean, one part of the point of World War II was settling accounts among the capitalists. The other point of World War II was it was an anti-communist war fighting the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union joined the Allies in putting down fascism, which definitely was a threat to the USSR, although also the UK and USA were a threat to the USSR, which after World War II itself was over in 1945, Italy and Germany and Japan joined with the Allies in helping to crush the Soviet Union. So the Axis may have lost point one of the war, but they absolutely, along with the rest of the capitalist countries, succeeded at point two of World War II, which was anti-communism. That took a number of decades in the Cold War to do. Germany is like, hey, no one serves at the helm of global empire. If I take out the Soviet Union, the crown is mine. Yeah, I mean, that was definitely was like, you know, who was going to stop the USSR, for sure. How is it a capitalist war? Because it's being fought by capitalists based on the material needs of their system. All right, we are going to leave it there. Thank you, everybody. This was a very long stream today, but it did record 3 hours and 35 minutes about. Thanks to everybody who showed up in the chat. This was a good discussion, and we'll get to that desovietization article ASAP. It'll be the first thing we do in the next stream if I don't upload an offline video on it sooner. So I appreciate all that. Thanks again to the patrons whose names were on the screen a few minutes ago. I would make content even if nobody supported. I wouldn't be able to spend nearly as much time on it. So if you like this channel, thank me, but also thank a patron. Consider becoming one. Thank the people who show up for the live streams and engage in the conversation. And remember to engage. That helps YouTube to recommend this content to more people. Like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, even if it's good video or just something like thanks or something like that. So that's all good for agitating and educating online, but also remember to organize. As we've stressed multiple times, you have to get organized, whether it's political party, a union, labor union, tenant union. Get out there and network, because when you see the need for an action, it's a lot harder to get something going if you don't already know people. Whereas if you're in an org, even if it's a half-assed org, you will at least have a network and other people you can brainstorm with. And we got to redraw a lot of lines in the left, in the U.S. left. We need reorganization of different parties and groups. That's only going to happen through mass participation. So join what's in your area, get to know your left, network, let them get to know you, find out who you can trust, and start working on projects. Things will come of that. It's not going to happen just through idle talk. It happens through struggle. That sharpens class consciousness. Learning history and theory also sharpens class consciousness, but participating in things is what really puts it all into perspective and really moves it forward. With crappy struggle, we get a crappy vanguard. With a crappy vanguard, we have a crappy vanguard party. The vanguard just being, it's not an elitist term. It just means those people who have the most knowledge of history and the most class consciousness, just the most experienced kind of on top of it people. There's many other valiant socialists who are just less experienced and haven't devoted as much thought to it. They're willing to fight for the cause. They may not be sort of in the vanguard of strategy. So anyway, some people have an issue with that term. It's the most class conscious segment of the working class. Doesn't mean no one else has any class consciousness. It just means the most. It's a relative term. Okay, so anyway, poor participation, poor struggle means a poor vanguard, means poor parties. We need that participation. Again, I believe that the problems of not having the parties that we need and all of that will correct itself in that process. So get out there, get organized, find out what's going on. If not in your town, at least in your county or state. Failing all of that, the country, but you can probably find something at least at the statewide level. All right, thanks again, and we'll see you in the next stream.